He is a resident of St. Croix County and lives in Star Prairie. Mr. Koch, it's a pleasure to introduce you to the county board this morning for confirmation. Pending confirmation, Dale will begin his duties as the new Veteran Service Officer for St. Croix County on December 15th. And Mr. Merlin Blaisdell, who is also here this morning, will be retiring after the first of the year, so we'll have a few weeks of overlap between the time when Dale starts and Merlin officially retires. We went through an extensive process to get to this point. We had assistance from Supervisor Howard Novotny as a representative of the Health and Human Services Board, Supervisor Travis Schochner as a representative of the Administration Committee, Tammy Funk in the Human Resources Department, myself, Merlin Blaisdell from the Veteran Service Office, and also greatly assisted by Mr. Dave Green, Mr. John Helgeson, and Mr. Donald Lind from all three members of the Veteran Service Commission. We all interviewed approximately, I think it was 5 or 6 different candidates after a pretty thorough search and screen process assisted by HR. And this group, we winnowed it down to a group of finalists. We interviewed the candidates, and we're real pleased to present Mr. Koch's candidacy for board confirmation. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dale to the board and to say a few words, and then Merlin Blaisdell, our current Veteran Service Officer, will say a few words and then introduce some distinguished members of the Veteran Service Commission and our veterans organizations in St. Croix County. And personally, I'd like to welcome all of you. I see Dave here, and Dave, as a member of the commission, are the other members here? Dave is here, and Dave sat in on the interviews, and good to see you, Dave. And so Dale, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Say a few words, and then I'll turn it over to Merlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, County Board, distinguished members. Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here as your appointee for County Veteran Service Officer. As I was already mentioned, I spent 30 years in the Coast Guard, retiring as a Chief Warrant Officer. Currently, the County Veteran Service Officer Assistant over in Washington County. I believe the experience, education, and knowledge I'm bringing with me will benefit the veterans here in St. Croix County. Besides being a County Veteran Service Officer Assistant, I'm also on the Military Retiree Council for the Twin Cities, the Twin Cities Honor Flight. Both of these include Western Wisconsin. I'm also an active member of the New Richmond American Legion Post. I am passionate about helping veterans, and I'm looking forward to bringing that passion over here to St. Croix County. Thank you.
Well, I think you can tell by Dale's demeanor that he is the person for this job, and I personally want to congratulate him and thank him for his service. And I've known Dale for quite some time now, and so we have an opportunity to work together with service officers of both Minnesota and Wisconsin. We have a meeting actually scheduled for the 15th of December at the Medical Center in Minneapolis, so we're going to try to work that out to see if we can't be there. It's been a great pleasure for me to serve as County Service Officer here in St. Croix County. I started 7 years ago on the 31st of December. So I'll have 7 years and 2 days in St. Croix County. But my predecessor I thank him, Lawrence Sather, for all the help that he had given me to get going on this, and I will offer my assistance to Dale as much as he would like. So again, thank you for being a part of my life and my family's life, and I'm looking forward to retirement, but I have some mixed feelings about that as well. So again, thank you for everything. We will have a party. We're planning that at the American Legion Post 240 in Baldwin on the 11th of January. So there should be an email that comes out, or if you haven't already gotten it. The band that I have, I've hired a band, and as most of you know, I like to whistle while I work, and I like to have a little fun doing it, and so I'm gonna have a little fun in retirement as well. So the band's name is the Hot Flashes, and I want to make sure that that you take it just that way. Don't read anything else into that. But it's going to be fun. I'd like to recognize the VFW post here from New Richmond, and they can maybe introduce themselves as they stand up. I want to tell you that this post is the most active post in probably the state of Wisconsin. They do a lot of great work. They volunteer throughout the communities. They provide assistance to needy veterans. And I tell you, whenever I need something that I can't, coordinate through the county, Dave Green's the guy I call, and this whole group here is a wonderful addition to the veterans service of St. Croix County. So the commander's down here, and then we'll just start on the end and go through.
Can you hear me? Yes. I'm the commander of the VFW 10818, Lee Meyer. I'm also the chaplain for the Somerset American Legion Group, and I'm the treasurer for the Vietnam Veterans of America, so I'm busy. I would like to thank Merlin because we have worked with him for the last 7 years for all of his service that he's done for the veterans in this county. We have over 6,000 veterans in the county, and we're very busy assisting those veterans and making sure that they're fully productive members of society. And we look forward to Dale coming on the job, and we would also like to thank the board for appointing him and considering him for this job because the need is great, and as you know, the war goes on. Basically, I fought in Vietnam against the communists, as did other people in Korea, but the war against the ISA, Al-Qaeda, and all those guys go on. And we're going to have veterans coming back from that war, and we will assist them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dave Green, BFW Post 10818, and past commander there. Merlin, you've done a marvelous job with veterans in the community. I just can't say enough about what you've done. And Dale, you've got big shoes to fill. That's lack of a better term. And I also would like to thank the board for hiring a full-time staff member to the Veteran Service Office. It's much needed, and as more and more veterans come home, the need will be greater and greater as we go along. Merlin, thank you very much for what you've done for all the veterans in the community. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Green. I'm with the New Richmond Auxiliary, Post 10818, and I'm the chaplain.
Dave Sheritz, I'm the adjutant with Post 10818. Thank you, Merlin.
I'm John Mortensen, and I was a quartermaster for a post starting back in the early 90s, 11 and a half years. And I want to thank Merlin for his assistance along the way. And also I would mention I was on the county board for 16 years. I left in 2010. Thank you. Oops, excuse me.
My name is Ken House. I'm the quartermaster currently for Post 10818. Merlin, thank you very much for your service and for your help. Dale, welcome. I sign the checks.
I'm Wanda Vayu. I'm the patriotic instructor for the Ladies Auxiliary Post 10818.
I just wanted to say thanks to this organization, especially and to all the veterans organizations of St. Croix County. They do a lot of work, and it's good to have them here today and representing. So thank you for all being here. It's not all about
just
me.
a minute.
It's about you.
Yeah, we can.
We also have a representative of U.S. Senator Ron Johnson's office who would like to say a few words. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Scott Bolstead. I'm Senator Johnson's Wisconsin Outreach Director. I heard in the prayer this morning asking for revelation, knowledge, and wisdom. Well, hopefully later on the agenda you'll get that, but okay. I have some correspondence here from the Senator. It's for Merlin, and it's a letter. This is for Sergeant First Class Retired Merlin Blaisdell, St. Croix County Veteran Service Officer. Dear Merlin, it is an honor and privilege to recognize you for your long service to the veterans of the United States of America and their families. From your years of service in the United States Army, through your work the last 11 years as County Veteran Service Officer for Pierce County and then St. Croix County, you have demonstrated your devotion to assisting the finest among us. America relies on our best and brightest sons and daughters to defend our freedom and ideals. You answered the call of duty, serving honorably for 21 years that included a tour with the 82nd Airborne Division. After the military, you spent time in the private sector before answering the call to serve again. This time, your service was for others who served our veterans. I would like to thank you for making a difference in the lives of our military veterans and their families. I wish you and Denise a happy and healthy retirement. May God watch over you, your family, the men and women of our armed forces, and the veterans who have answered the call of duty. Sincerely, Ron Johnson, United States Senator. And I also have a certificate here, which says to Merlin, for more than 11 years of service and dedication as County Veteran Service Officer for Pierce and St. Croix counties, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service and dedication. So, Merlin.
Thank you, Merlin. Good luck.
So thank you, members of the board, and the confirmation is for action this morning.
I'll make a
Thank
motion
you.
to approve.
I'm up for a motion. Supervisor Brinkman?
No, he made the motion.
Supervisor, okay. Supervisor Kiesler? Motion by Kiesler, second by Supervisor Brinkman. Any discussion? There's no discussion. We can vote. And that was unanimous. Welcome aboard, Dale. Pat, did you have one more recognition with the?
Yes. One more recognition this morning, and this is a great pleasure, and I think this is a repeat performance for this group. I'd like to introduce Coach Bruce Larson. Bruce is the head coach of the Somerset Spartans. And all of you are familiar with the fact of the success of the Spartans on the field and off the field as student athletes in Somerset in St. Croix County. So I'd like to personally congratulate Coach Larson and his team for their state Division IV state championship. And Bruce is here this morning to say a few words and introduce some of his teammates. So Coach Larson.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for inviting us here. This is a great honor for us, and it's interesting that we got paired up with who we got paired up with, because years ago I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and on an educational field trip, and learned more than I ever thought I would. And the stuff I learned we brought back and applied to what we do at Somerset. And it's some of the best things that ever happened to us. And what we took from there were the military values. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, courage, integrity. And in football, you can run any offense you want, you can run any defense you want, and you can win a lot of different ways. But what it really comes down to is what kids are built upon and what foundation they're built on. And those things are our foundation. And there couldn't be a better foundation for us. And we've had a lot of success because a lot of kids have worked very hard, and we've gotten kids to believe in old-fashioned traditional values that stand the test of time. And when you get right down to it, those are what pay the bills. And I'm really proud of our kids and what they've done. We're not perfect by any means, but I do know this. We work on those things every day, and without them, we would not be where we are. And it's been a lot of fun. They're a great thing for us to be a part of. This is a great thing for us to be a part of, and really appreciate everything. We do have 3 kids with us. First is Reed Belargin. He was our quarterback and outside linebacker. Stand up, Reed. Next to him is Cole Martinson. He was our center and nose guard. And then the last one is Max Proshak. He was our fullback and middle linebacker. All 3 of them are team captains for us. They've been multi-year players for us. They've done a great job, and I think they represent what we believe in very strongly and do a great job. And it's been a pleasure to work with them, and they got a great future ahead of them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Coach Larson. Thank you to all your team. They did really a good job this year.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to, we have the city of Richmond here, and I believe the mayor, Fred Horn, wanted to introduce some people before.
Thank you, board chair, board members. Seems to be a few new faces since I sat on this board. It's a pleasure to be back, and for those of you who know me, it's good to see you guys again. And those who don't, I wish you well in your positions. As John had said, he had served 16 years. I didn't serve quite that many, but it was pleasurable for most of those years, and I wish you guys well. But I'm proud to be here representing the city of New Richmond. Especially when we have the VFW in New Richmond. It's a very active organization. We have the Legion. We have a lot of things going on in New Richmond. It's a very proud community to be representing. So I'm very honored to have that position as mayor. I'd like to introduce our city administrator, Mike Darrow. He will, as I promised the board chair that I'd just say a few words, and I've kind of said that. So true to my word, I'm going to turn this over to our administrator, Mike Darrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everybody, Mr. Chair and county board members. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank Cindy for coordinating this and the staff and Patrick for inviting us as well. We're going to do a short community video that introduces one of the things that we do is to try to market our community, and our mayor is a key feature in that. I wanted to just say some of the things that I think make New Richmond a unique place to live and work. A lot of times we celebrate our businesses, new businesses that come in. We had Phillips Medicize that just expanded a couple weeks ago. They're in the process. What I think is unique to New Richmond is that we can celebrate our veterans who are here today and the active work that they do. We can celebrate the opening of a homeless shelter. And we can celebrate those just as important as a new business. It is the sense of community that having lived here for a short time, 2.5 years, coming up on 3, that's what you don't see in our community. You see an active group of people that truly care. And you'll see that in our video. After the video, I'll introduce Beth Thompson, Jeremiah Wentz, and then we'll open it up to questions. So we'll play the video and take it from there. We also have flash drives that we'll be passing out. On those drives are all of our marketing material, demographic information, as well as this community video as well.
Hello, my name is Fred Horn. I'm the mayor of the city of New Richmond. New Richmond is just 40 miles east of the Twin Cities, and you'd be amazed at all of we have to offer in this small community of 8,000. New Richmond has this unique ability to have a small town feel, but yet it's a very progressive place to live, work, and play. There's so much that New Richmond has to offer that I've asked some of our community members to share with you all of the things that we have here in New Richmond.
My name is Robert Ketlow Price. I am the owner of Elements Cafe in New Richmond. My wife and my family moved here because of the school district. You know, we knew that the bridge was going in, and we did hear that this was going to be the next bedroom community for the Twin Cities area, and we felt it was just a great opportunity overall.
My name is Allie Slaney, and I am a high school teacher here in the New Richmond School District. Our school district offers so many great opportunities when it comes to fine arts, extracurricular activities, clubs, sports, AP classes, all wonderful, wonderful things that our students have available to them.
My name is Bill Buell, and I am the owner-operator of the Spaces Center for Creativity. New Richmond is a community that is poised on the edge of a phenomenal positive explosion. There's a number of interactive pieces that are going on consecutively, if you will, that are focused on the strengths of our community and what we can do together, collaboratively, co-creating to present and act towards a view of the future that might be different than our view of the past.
I'm Mary Sasser. I am the curator here at the New Richmond Heritage Center. And I think there is, to my mind anyway, a strong evidence of young, interested families moving in who are learning how to become involved. And I see that as a very hopeful thing.
My name is Jackie Huff, and I am the Member Experience Director here at the center. The center is here for everyone, all ages, all sizes, all shapes, and all levels of ability.
I'm Steve Massey, President and CEO of Westfields Hospital. Westfields enhances the community because it brings high-quality health care close to home. It's connected to a major healthcare provider in the Twin Cities. Because we are part of the Health Partners family, we have capabilities that a town this size normally wouldn't have.
My name is Mary Kay Rice, and I'm the Customer Service Representative here at New Richmond Regional Airport. We have full service capabilities, and we get people in every day, whether they're coming up from Red Wing or whether they're coming in from Washington, who simply say, "You're the best kept secret out there."
My name is Jonathan Tim, and I'm the proud owner of Jets Coffee Bistro. The community of New Richmond, I think, is ever-changing, and I know a lot of the downtown business owners, we like to work together on things, and we're always trying to come up with new ideas and just hold new events and things like that to bring us all more together.
My name is Dan Rook. I'm in this community 3 to 4 days a week. Coming to Brady's is kind of a fun deal. It's a great environment. Food is awesome. Beer is awesome. I mean, it's just a very relaxing way to enjoy the middle part of my day. Well, New Richmond is obviously a growth community. You know, there's a lot of development around, a lot of industry. It's certainly one of the up-and-coming areas in the state. With the new bridge coming across, it's only going to continue to enhance.
My name's Marcus Dalton. I work at Champ Sports Bar and Grill. Well, the rooftop's awesome. I mean, got 8 fireplaces up there and kind of gives a more outdoor atmosphere for the city beautiful.
Well, I'm Bill Komola, and
I've been at this farmer's market for 34 or 35 years. It's been a great community. It's a great place to raise kids. It's been a perfect place.
As you can see, New Richmond is a diverse place to be. Whether you live, work, or play here, New Richmond has something for everyone.
New Richmond is home. It is friendly, it is warm and inviting.
New Richmond is where I sell my produce for the farmer's market.
Place where I love to go running early in the morning.
The place that I call home.
A really great nightlife.
It's about growth and technology.
An eclectic group of individuals, farmers to businessmen.
The place that I started my career, where I got my nursing degree. Health conscious, it's very welcoming.
I love living in New Richmond.
Come see for yourself as we invite you to take a closer look at this unique and thriving community. Come grow with us.
All right, so as you saw, a lot of great things in New Richmond. The last thing that I wanted to say, as you know, and you'll hear in the next presentation, is all of us are at this amazing point that will generate or impact future generations. With the bridge, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we stand ready as a city, as a community, to work with the county. You've got amazing staff here, obviously. Our work with Bill Rubin in particular on the economic development has been a significant asset to us. What's going to make us in future generations is that creativity, that desire, that thinking out of the box, and that shared responsibility to reduce costs, create financial sustainability, economic and environmental sustainability. So we stand ready to work with you. We thank you for the time today. And again, I'm going to introduce Jeremiah Wendt, our our Public Works Director. And after he presents, then Beth Thompson, our Community Development Director, will say a couple words, and then we'll open it up for any questions. Again, thanks for your time.
Chairman and board members, thank you for having the City of New Richmond here today. And I just wanted to give a brief update from the Public Works perspective on what we've been doing in 2014, what we're looking ahead to in 2015 and beyond. So many of you may know that the City of New Richmond 2014 was dubbed the year of the plan. And so from a Public Works perspective, we've been doing a lot of planning. One piece of that we're particularly proud of is the completion of our park plan, and something that was done by staff in-house and really a valuable document for the city and certainly as a reference for you as well. That's available on our website and gives a little history on the New Richmond Park system and amenities that we have, uses that we have, and also looks ahead to the next 5 or 10 years to what we want to do with our park system. Along that line, we've also been working on a capital improvement plan in 2014, looking ahead again to the next 5 years. What do we want to do from a transportation standpoint? What do we want to do from parks or utilities standpoint to prepare for the future in New Richmond? And so we're going to be jumping into some of that stuff in 2015. With transportation improvements, park improvements. We got kind of a jump start on that in 2014 with the completion of the Doughboy Trail, which I think is a very valuable asset to the city. So I encourage you to check that out. We'll be having some more development there as part of the Phipps Center for the Arts Art Bench Trail system that will be coming into that Doughboy Trail area. And also wanted to mention in 2015, we're also going to be kind of taking on the next phase of development in Freedom Park on the north side of New Richmond, both as part of the overall plan for developing that as a regional park, and also in preparation for the September 10th through 14th, 2015, the Vietnam Veterans Moving Memorial Wall will be coming to New Richmond and hosted at that site. So. Mark your calendars, and we'll hope to see you there.
Good morning, County Chair, members.
I'm the Director of the Community Development, Economic Development in the City of New Richmond. And throughout the last couple of years, what we've really been focusing on is trying to get to know our businesses. Our local businesses are there. We have tried to meet with every business. There's 356 businesses in New Richmond. Mike and I have been going out and meeting with them, letting them know that the City of New Richmond is there for them, not just looking for the business to come in from the cities or from somewhere else. We want to make sure that our businesses at home are comfortable and want to expand in our community. We also are, however, marketing, as you've seen and you'll see in your jump drive that we passed out to you. There's a community video, which you saw, a marketing video, some of our other demographics. We've been meeting with some site selectors and some businesses and handing those tools out along with a new packet that we put together for people to come into our community. But what's really unique about New Richmond, and Mike has stated, is the people. It's amazing, the people who work for the City of New Richmond and the people who are in the City of New Richmond themselves. The group that did the videos for us, it was a local group. It was two youngsters. I say youngsters, they're in their 20s, probably not young anymore, but they graduated from New Richmond. They both graduated from college locally in Wisconsin, and they have a company called Dandelion Pictures. So it's neat to use those homegrown kind of businesses to foster what we do in New Richmond. So that's really exciting, and we're looking forward to the future. In 2015, we're looking forward to preparing more for the bridge. We're working on passing a zoning ordinance this month in December here. So we've rewritten our entire zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance to make sure that the gateway coming into New Richmond is comfortable for everyone to come in with their new businesses and with their residents. So people coming in to build new homes in New Richmond also. So thank you.
Thank you very much to the City of New Richmond and your input and a very nice presentation you did today. Any questions for the city? None? Thank you again. We're going to move on into the community and economic impact, the St. Croix River crossing, St. Croix County perspective.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard in a couple different ways this morning. We've heard about, made references to the St. Croix River crossing project. This morning we have a report on the fiscal and economic development opportunities created by the St. Croix River crossing project. There was a study recently conducted to try to examine how the new crossing will influence St. Croix County, our population growth and economic development opportunities, and provide communities like New Richmond and all the communities in St. Croix County with information and tools for planning for economic development and growth because of the new river crossing project, and provide opportunities and suggestions to communities to shape that growth and try to plan for it. This morning we have two gentlemen, Matt Kurz. Matt is employed with the UW Extension Office out of Madison, employed in the Center for Community and Economic Development. He works in extension with communities, providing these types of reports, working with community leaders. We also have Mr. Tom Gillespie from Gillespie Demographics, and Tom served as the Minnesota State demographer for over 30 years. He's currently retired and self-employed with Gillespie Demographics. So I'd like to introduce both Matt and Tom, who will present the report to the county board this morning. Gentlemen, welcome.
You bring it up over there. Okay, excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Mr. Chair, County Board members, thank you for the invitation to present some work that we've been doing to you over the past 6 months or so, looking at the community and economic impacts of the new river crossing. And while we've been working on this for about the past 6 months, this is something that's been in the plans for about a year now. We were brought on board by the Community Development Department and our former UW Extension Conrad agent, Pete Kling, to look at this back in September of 2013. So over this time, we've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people, to look at a lot of information, and make some to identify some key findings that are going to be important to communities and to St. Croix County as a whole moving forward. Again, I'm Matt Curis. I'm with UW Extension out of Madison. I have been with the Center for Community and Economic Development for about 13 years now, and it's been a great opportunity to work with you locally here. You have to advance it there? You should, no, you should. Oh, I should have control? You should be able to. Sorry. That's okay. Yeah. So, as we just heard, there is a lot of uncertainty facing the crossing. We really don't know what the true impacts of the crossing are going to be on the county, as well as communities that sit at kind of the foot of the crossing. So we have a couple of broad study goals that we want to keep in mind as we're talking about the findings today. And really we want to talk about how we can broadly understand how the river crossing could impact the region's future economy, tax base, and provision of services. And we say could because we can look at a lot of information, we can talk to a lot of people, we can make a lot of assessments, but it's really hard to identify what the exact impacts are going to be. So we're trying to use the best information that we can have at our hands to look at how it could affect the county and communities. That said, we do want to give communities a lot of information to help them better plan going forward. So we want to help them understand what the economic impacts might be. But we also want to give them some tools to help them identify what the fiscal impacts may be on their communities. With growth brings new revenues to communities, but it also brings new costs. So one of the things we try and do is identify what some of the fiscal impacts may be so they can do future planning in terms of what it means for community services, what the impacts may be on school districts, what the impacts may be on public works, and so on and so forth. We also want to identify opportunities for shaping future growth. And we can, again, provide a lot of information on the river crossing and what it may mean going forward. But really, communities have an opportunity to shape their growth. We know that growth is going to come, but how it appears in communities is really up to them to some degree. What this study does not do, this is not a land use plan. We're not trying to identify or dictate certain types of land use that may occur in communities. Again, communities have those opportunities to shape that growth themselves, and we're not here to try and say what that growth may look like and where it may occur. Again, we're not trying to pinpoint the exact impacts on communities. Because of the nature of doing population projections, of forecasting future economic growth, it is very hard to say where a specific type of opportunity will occur in a community. So we're trying to look at this from more of a broad perspective. And finally, this is not a comprehensive economic development strategy. We'll provide a lot of information that will help communities develop strategies to grow their economies, but again, it is not a comprehensive strategy for a given community or for the entire county. Next slide, please. With that, before we get into too much detail on the study, I do want to recognize some individuals who have been very instrumental in making this project happen. Ellen, Amanda, and Brett with the Community Development Department have been very, very helpful and insightful in driving this process forward. Certainly Agnes Ring, as part of the chair of the Community Development Committee here in St. Croix County, has been very useful and helpful in providing insights. And then we've also had a committee of community members throughout all sorts of different sectors, public and private, that have been instrumental in making this process go forward. And you'll see them on the screen there, and my apologies if I've forgotten anyone, but I just want you to know that this has been driven by the community as well. It's not just outsiders coming in and making recommendations or identifying findings. As I mentioned, the study focus is St. Croix County and the so-called corridor communities. And I think the county is an important level of analysis because when you look at a lot of the studies that have been done for the river crossing, a lot of them have been done on the Minnesota side, and a lot of them have been pinpointed for communities such as the town of St. Joseph. But there are going to be broader impacts that occur in St. Croix County as well. And we also recognize that just because of the geographic location of the river crossing and the highway distribution that comes out of the river crossing, that it's going to have unique impacts on a number of individual communities as well, primarily along the Highway 64 corridor. So when we say corridor communities, we're looking at a number of 8 different municipalities. We're looking at the village of Star Prairie, the town of Star Prairie, the city of New Richmond, the town of Richmond, the town of St. Joseph, the village of North Hudson, and the village and town of Somerset. So if you hear corridor communities, those are the 8 municipalities that we're talking about. So I'd like to shape today's presentation around some key findings that we've come across as part of this process, but also those that have been identified as part of the work with the study committee that I mentioned just a minute ago. And I think this one's very important, and it's that infrastructure improvements can be seen as a catalyst for change, but are neither necessary nor sufficient to guarantee economic and population growth rates in surrounding areas. The fact is that it is very difficult to isolate the impacts of infrastructure improvements on a given community or on a county. The reality is that there are many, many factors that drive population and economic growth. It's an area's demographic makeup. It's its socioeconomic conditions. It's its land use. It's its labor force. It's its business climate. There's all these other factors that go into how a community grows over time. That said, enhanced or new highways or other transportation infrastructure in suburban areas generally have a positive influence on population and economic growth. One way they do this is to create efficiencies in terms of transporting goods and services into and out of communities, but they also improve access to jobs in the metropolitan area, and we'll go into this a little more detail here in a second. So to say that it's difficult to isolate the growth impacts is true, but it's also important to recognize that for the most part, transportation improvement do tend to have a positive influence. It's also important to recognize, though, that when you look at population growth in a community or economic growth in a community, some of the biggest factors that you see in what happens in the future are actually what happened in the past. If a community was growing in the past, it tends to grow in the future. If a community was not growing in the past, there's a good chance it may not grow in the future as well. So keeping that in mind, one of the things that the river crossing actually can do is help facilitate that future growth to continue. Now, it may not be the same as it was in the past, but it does help it continue to grow in several ways. And importantly, because of how communities make decisions about where growth occurs and how it might occur in a community, decisions that are made in one community are going to influence what happens in neighboring communities. What happens in the town of St. Joseph is going to impact what happens in the city of New Richmond. The reality is that communities along this corridor are going to have to partner with one another to understand what the growth and impacts are going to be on their communities, because it's going to connect them even more so than they already are. Are there any questions on that? And I would encourage you, if you do have questions, that we move along here, because this is a lot of information to throw at you on a Tuesday morning. Please feel free to ask as we go forward. Next slide, please. So because it is difficult to isolate the impacts of a given infrastructure project on future growth, one of the things that we did was to actually look at comparable communities around the United States that had also had a bridge improvement or a bridge expansion, and these were those that tended to be within the periphery of a large metropolitan area. And it's difficult to find a lot of comparable projects around the United States, but these were 5 that we thought were somewhat insightful for looking at the river crossing. And when I say comparable projects too, it's important to realize that these are not exact replicas of what we'll see in the river crossing. They're different in very many different reasons, but they do provide some insights. So the 5 that we looked at were the Highway 370 corridor, which is located outside of St. Charles County, Missouri, completed in 1996 and also part of the St. Louis metropolitan area. The Bloomington Ferry Bridge, which I think is a very relative one for you, given how close it is, and also part of the Minneapolis metropolitan area, also completed in 1996. The Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge, which is in Charleston County, South Carolina, completed in 2005. The Blenner-Hassett Bridge, which is spans between Ohio and West Virginia, completed in 2008. And the George P. Coleman Memorial Bridge in Gloucester County, Virginia. All of these are expansion projects that went from a smaller bridge to a 4-lane project within a metropolitan area. And this is an animation, so you may have to be a little ready there, Cindy. It's okay. So can you just hit it once, please? So this is the population change in St. Croix County starting in 1970 going out to 2012. So this is the percent change starting in 1970 and then the percent change between any given year in 1970. And you'll see a box there. And that box is also another improvement project that happened in St. Croix County, which was the improvement of the crossing of I-94 at Hudson. And what we can see is that if we look at the growth trends before and after the completion of that project, we can see that the growth actually started to occur before the project began. And that the growth rate right after the project for about the first decade or so was pretty similar to what happened before then. We see growth pick up later on, but it's after the infrastructure had been in place for some time. Could you hit the next? This is Scott County, Minnesota, where the Bloomington Ferry Bridge is located. And again, that box is when the bridge project was completed. One of the things you'll notice here is that certainly it's one of the fastest growing counties in the metropolitan area, but also it was growing pretty significantly before the bridge was completed, before the Bloomington Ferry Bridge. And that the growth rate, while it did pick up slightly after the bridge was completed, for the most part, it was growing fast already before the bridge was already there. Next one, please. This is St. Charles, Missouri. And again, the box is when the Discovery Bridge was completed. And again, you'll see almost an identical growth rate before and after that bridge project was completed. Next one, please. This is in Gloucester, Virginia. Again, a very similar trend. You'll see when the box there is when the bridge was completed. This is Charleston, South Carolina. And then the last one is the Wood County, West Virginia, Washington County, Ohio. It's hard to see there on the bottom. Again, this kind of echoes what we saw on the previous slide, that if a community was growing beforehand, it continued to grow after the project was completed. If a community was not growing or was growing at a slower rate, the bridge did not necessarily continue that or spur additional growth in those areas. And again, these are somewhat anecdotal. These are a limited number of case studies, but they do reinforce what we've seen in looking at a lot of research on transportation infrastructure, is that they tend to facilitate growth and they tend to encourage growth on a path that was already occurring before. We can do a similar type of analysis doing employment. So this is growth in employment in a county. Very similar to the chart that you saw before with population. Those bars that you see there are recessionary periods. And I think that's important when we look at employment growth, because we have to realize, as I mentioned before, that economic growth and population growth are also influenced by many other factors, one of which being national economic conditions. So here is St. Croix County, Wisconsin. And again, you can see the growth before and after. Pretty similar to what happened with the population chart. Next one, please. These two are Scott County, Minnesota, and St. Charles County, Missouri. Again, very similar rates before and after these infrastructure projects. There you see the remaining three, the light blue being Gloucester, Virginia. Again, before and after, very similar. Same with Charleston, South Carolina, and same with Wood County, West Virginia. So again, the bridges themselves do not necessarily spur the growth, but they do help facilitate further growth going forward. Any questions on that? Okay, so one of the things we also did in looking at these comparison projects was not just compare population and employment growth. We also looked at other ways that the communities tried to respond to these projects occurring in their communities. So one of the things that we learned in talking to individuals in these different communities that had seen these infrastructure projects go forward is that they said that cross-community collaboration is very important, particular to economic development efforts. That they realize that they're part of a regional economy and that what goes on in one community is also going to benefit what goes on in another community because of commuter patterns and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we saw in Missouri is that they actually set up an economic development initiative called Discover 370, which is around the bridge, which linked all these communities together to help them sell the region as much as they sold their individual communities as well. You also saw them somewhat embrace some of the social, environmental, and economic impacts of the bridge. The bridge is already going to go up. It's already being constructed. So what they did was try and find key points that were important to each of these communities, and they tried to build upon them individually in each community. They also tried to maintain realistic expectations. And there's, as we said, a lot of uncertainty what may occur going forward. And there's also, I think, a lot of opinions that will say that it's going to spur a ton of growth or it may not spur any growth. And we don't know. But we have to try and use the data that's available to help us make those decisions going forward and keep it somewhat grounded in reality. And this one actually came from Shakopee, Minnesota, the final bullet point. And Shakopee sits at the base of the Bloomington Ferry Bridge, and they've seen pretty explosive growth over the last decade or so, actually over the last decade and a half. And what they suggested is that we overplan today for the future. Because of the uncertainty, we want to take all the information we have right now and try and plan for many, many contingencies that may come forward. Some of them may not occur, but if they do occur, you're ready for them to happen. You're not being reactive, you're being proactive. Our second key finding is that while infrastructure projects can facilitate future growth and help encourage future growth and do impact future growth, depending upon what your community was doing before, there are also broader growth trends in the county and metropolitan area that may influence future growth as well. And we have to recognize these. And these are driven by a number of larger demographic and economic shifts. I'm just going to cover some of these briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk a little bit more about some of these trends and also some of the ways that he's used this information to project what population may look like going forward. So certainly the completion of the river crossing will influence future growth, no doubt about it. Historical demographic patterns are going to matter as well, and we'll look at an example of that here in a minute. We're still facing a changing housing market since 2005, and we have to realize that there are some economic conditions out there that are still creating a challenge for the housing market that we must recognize. Tom will talk a little bit more about the growth of the Twin Cities metropolitan area and how that may influence growth in St. Croix County. The population in terms of its age structure is changing as well. We are getting older across St. Croix County and across the metropolitan area and across the state of Wisconsin. And the prime housing buying segment moving forward will be the millennials. And there is some research out there that debates whether or not the housing preferences that these individuals will have going forward is the same as that same age group in the past. So one of the things that I think is important to realize is that St. Croix County's population growth is largely influenced by in-migration of individuals, people moving from other places into St. Croix County. And one of the things we can do is look at its migration signature in terms of how people have moved into and out of this county of different age groups. So this looks at the net migration rate of different age groups, starting at 0 to 4, going all the way up to 75 and over. And you'll see that baseline of 0. If you have a positive inflow of individuals, more people moving into a community than out of a community of a certain age group, you have a positive net migration and you'll have a value above that line. If there are more people moving out of the community than into the community of a certain age group, you'll have a negative net migration rate and you'll be below that line. So if you could just hit the first one. This looks at net migration rates in the prior decade, from 2000 to 2010. And what this shows is that you will see a pretty big spike for a couple age groups there. Very high net in-migration rates of individuals 30 to 34 and 35 to 39. Higher than any other in-migration rate of any age group. You also see high in-migration rates of the 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and 10 to 14. That's probably those individuals' children that they're bringing along with them. So if we hit the next bar, we see the 1990s, a very similar pattern. And hit the next one, please. 1980s, rates not as high, but very similar pattern as well. So that age group has been a key driver of population growth in St. Croix County throughout the past 3 decades. Can we go to the next slide, please? This looks at the population age 30 to 39, that key demographic segment, in the entire Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington metropolitan statistical area. And this goes back to 1980 and goes forward with projections to the year 2040. And we can see that that population peaked in the mid-1990s, that age group is gradually getting smaller going forward. So there will be fewer of these individuals present in the metropolitan area who may want to move to St. Croix County. So that segment of the market will be declining somewhat. Now, it will start getting bigger again around 2030, but that's where the challenge arises in terms that we do not necessarily know what types of homes and what types of communities and what types of locations these individuals want to live in the future. So it's something to keep in mind. Next one. So also, this is just another perspective. That's the percentage of the population that's comprised by the age 30 to 39 cohort. And you can see that it made up a fairly large share of the metro area population back in the 1990s, and it's gradually getting smaller in terms of a total share. So there'll be less of those individuals. The other thing to keep in mind is that we are still coming out of a challenging housing market in some ways. Things are greatly improved, but St. Croix County had one of the highest foreclosure rates in the state of Wisconsin in the last part of the prior decade. This compares state of Wisconsin foreclosure rates from the year 2000 to the year 2013. The rate is the number of foreclosure filings per 100 housing units. And here we can see that certainly we saw the spike in the state of Wisconsin around 2007 to 2010, but we can see that it was almost double that in St. Croix County. This is not a reflection of market supply and demand by any stretch of the imagination, but the reality is that loan approval rates and other factors that were driven by some of these numbers are still lingering somewhat. So it's something to keep in mind going forward. And this is just an animation. So if you just hit it once, this just shows the foreclosure rate. So you can kind of compare what happened in St. Croix County compared to other parts of the state. The darker the green, the higher the foreclosure rate in a given census tract. And you'll see that really in the late 2000s, you can see that that entire western part of Wisconsin saw very high foreclosure rates relative to other parts of the state. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and he will share some more information with you about some of the population projections that he's developed for St. Croix County and these corridor communities, and his perspectives on what this might look like going forward over the next few decades. Tom?
Thank you, Matt. Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Tom Gillespie. I was contracted to prepare population projections for St. Croix County to 2050, and in doing that, I looked at both some of the short-run trends, recent past, current trends that we see for the county, as well as the kinds of future changes that we might see. One of the biggest things that happened and was fairly unexpected by many folks was that we saw a tremendous drop-off in some of the fastest growing counties of the nation in their growth rate from about the 2005 onward, really as a result of the housing market. The Twin City metropolitan area was pretty characteristic of this. Where we were different was that among the Frost Belt states and Frost Belt regions of the country, that the Twin City metropolitan area had some of the fastest growing counties in the nation. That is really quite exceptional. Isanti and Chisago counties up 35 just to the north of Washington County were in the top 100 fastest growing counties, as were Wright and Sherburne counties on the road to St. Cloud, and Scott and Carver counties in the southwest metropolitan area, and St. Croix County, Wisconsin, all were among the fastest 100 growing counties of the nation, and represented a very, very strong growth. And this growth was really started in the 70s and continued through most of the 80s and 90s, and through the first half of the aughts, and then around 2005, we began to see a break in this region as well as nationally, and some of the fastest growing counties were the ones that saw the biggest plummets in population growth, and we saw the central cities of the nation that had actually been declining in population for over half a century begin to experience some growth. Next slide, please. This merely reinforces that, looking specifically at St. Croix County since 1990, and you can see the very rapid drop-off in population growth, and we reached a low point around 2010, and we've sort of stayed in that range for the last few years. Next slide, please. What really happened was that we saw an enormous drop-off in migration. This happened nationally. The United States has been known as an extremely mobile society ever since our beginning. We've always been known as a nation that moved around a lot, and that people went to where the opportunities are. That really changed around 2006, 2007. We saw a dramatic drop-off in the United States. We now are at record low levels of mobility nationally. That is true in Minnesota, it is true in Wisconsin, and St. Croix County is certainly an example of this, where for really the last 3 years we've seen no real net migration, about the same number of people moving out as moving in. That is the short-run situation that we see in the county growth. Next slide. In the longer run, St. Croix County, of course, is part of the Twin City metropolitan area and influenced strongly by growth in the Twin City metropolitan area. The Twin City metropolitan area is a strong growth area, at least among the Frost Belt metropolitan areas in the northeast and midwest portion of the United States. But the expectation, the forecast right now, is for a dramatic slowing in population growth. That is also consistent with the projection of a national slowing in population growth. It is not because this region is exceptional, but rather we will be reflecting many of the national trends in growth. In the longer run, in addition to economic considerations, housing considerations, two other things that we really need to look at that are influencing population growth are aging of the population. One, so old people tend not to move. It's the young people in their 20s and 30s that move a lot, and that's simply we are aging as a society, and the population in their 60s and 70s is increasing very, very rapidly. The other group, really the house buying group, is this millennial generation that, at least right now, is showing little tendency to purchase housing, and when they do purchase housing, they tend to purchase it closer into to central cities and not in what has been the faster growing suburban and exurban counties of the nation. That could potentially change, but there are apparently right now there are some strongly held personal opinions about housing preferences, about wanting to live in a smaller house closer in with less commuting, and that is coupled with some of the economic considerations that well, we all know millennials have really had a tough time getting traction going in their careers, and that is also slowing down the housing market. Next slide. Those pieces of information, as well as other pieces of information in our back pocket, the approach used is a very traditional demographic approach called the cohort component method for projecting population. And what we do there is project the number of babies born, the number of people who die, and migration based upon the age, gender profile of the county. Minnesota and Wisconsin are among the longest lived populations of the United States and in fact in the world, and that is reflected in the life expectancy and mortality expectations, that this is simply a very long-lived population, and so the life table used is one that is appropriate for this population. Births, on the other hand, tend to be more near the average in terms of fertility rates for the nation, and use those fertility rates as well. Migration is, of course, the big question mark, and in terms of impact of the bridge. In this, I looked at the age and gender profile of St. Croix County for each decade over the past 60 years in terms of migration profiles to develop assumptions about profile in the future. I prepared alternative models of projection. The three most likely, I did do the two extreme situations just for bracketing, but the three most likely are reflected here. The first model, this is all starting in 2015, so we're starting a month from now, and looking out to 2050, and this first model assumes a continuation of the current out-migration tendency of the county, basically continuation of where we are right now through the next 5 years, followed by a period of rapid in-migration, roughly equivalent to the kind of in-migration that we saw during the 1990s, and then after 2025, slowing down to a rate more similar to what we saw in the 1960s. The second model assumes a very steady kind of migration profile, very much like the 80s, that would still represent a rather substantial departure from where we are right at the moment. That would assume a substantial bump upward in migration. Model 3 assumes a very rapid start after the bridge completion, with rates approximating what we saw in the 90s over the next 5 years, slowing to something closer to what we saw for the 1980s as we move into the out years. Next. The results of these models are shown here, and also the green line with the triangles, the higher one with the triangles, reflects the projections that are the official Wisconsin state projections at this time. As it turns out, the Model 3 and the official state projections are virtually identical. Again, this would be a scenario where we would see very, very rapid, immediate growth upon completion of the bridge. You would notice that very quickly, that as soon as the bridge is completed, there would be all sorts of sales activity going on immediately. That results in a 2050 population of just above 122,000 people. The other two models are the two lower lines. The Model 1, as you can see, assumes that we continue on this current situation for the next 5 years, and then experience very rapid growth for a period of 5 years, moderating after that. Model 2 assumes a fairly constant level of migration, which is probably not terribly appropriate for in the next 5 years, given that there will be a major change in infrastructure. But we can see here that the lower projection results in a 2050 population of about 107,000 people. The upper projection results in a population of about 122,000 people by the end of the 2050 period. Next slide. We also looked at the highest impact area, as Matt pointed out, the towns of St. Joseph, Village of Somerset, Town of Somerset, the Village of North Hudson, and the City of New Richmond, Town of New Richmond, Star Prairie, the Town of Star Prairie, and looked at the impact in that area. Next slide. Using the same models, we have a projection going out, assuming that the rate of growth is about 38% of the total county's population growth. That has actually been an almost constant for over 4 decades. We could assume that would increase or decrease, but that is a fairly stable number. And then those projections result in population projections for the most impacted area for 2040 range from about nearly 42,000 people to down to about 37,500 people as a range in population.
In addition to just raw population growth, we also have to consider how the age structure of the county may be changing as well. And one of the things that Tom mentioned is that we are aging. We're aging as a nation, we're aging as a metro area, and we're aging as a county. So we can look at, for instance, the number of people turning age 18 in a given year, and compare that to the number of people turning age 65 in a given year. And I use this chart as a way to show how a county or a region may be aging, because this is one way of estimating the number of people entering the labor force at a given time and the number of people perhaps exiting the labor force at a given time. So this is looked at more from a labor force or economic development perspective. Now certainly individuals can enter the labor force before the age of 18, and they may certainly stay in the labor force after the age of 65, but these are traditional entry and exit type years for individuals. So if you could just hit the first one. So this looks at the number of residents turning age 18 in a 5-year period from 2010 going out to the year 2040. And you can see it gradually increasing from 2010 out to about 2020, leveling off a bit, and then increasing slightly in 2035 and 2040. If you hit the next slide. These are the number of people turning age 65 in those same periods. And if you look at 2010, there were almost twice as many people turning age 18 as were turning age 65 in St. Croix County. And if you go forward, the gap closes considerably. If you look at the year 2025, just 10 years from now, there is very little gap between the number of individuals turning age 18 in a given year and the number of people turning age 65 in a given year. So this has implications certainly for the labor force. This is not just occurring here, this is occurring in counties throughout western Wisconsin and throughout the metropolitan area as well. But it also has implications for housing. As these individuals get older, and 65 certainly is not old by any stretch of the imagination, but as these individuals approach retirement age and decide where they want to live, we're seeing some trends where they want to be closer to amenities, things like healthcare, things like retail, things like services. They want to be close to transportation options, and they want to have the types of homes that they can stay in long term. So that could certainly not just change how our community looks in terms of its labor force, but also in terms of the types of housing that may be desired across St. Croix County communities. Next slide, please. Certainly, we can also look at the school-age population. So we can look at the individuals ages 5 to about 19. We can't break it down to 18 or 17, but we can look at the broad trend in individuals of these different age groups moving forward. And we do see, as Tom would suggest, with the population growth, we do see a growth of school-age individuals as well. And this is going to vary from year to year and by segment, but for the most part, the growth of school-age population will continue in St. Croix County. Now that said, population projections are a useful tool, but they are by no means an absolute. That there are a lot of unknowns going forward. So I think one of the key lessons from looking at these population projections is that they should be used as a tool for policy development, not necessarily numbers that are set in stone. So if a community decides they want to try and grow more than they're projected to, there are certainly things that they can try and do to influence that growth. If a community decides they don't want the growth, there are things they can do as well to try and change that growth pattern. So they need to decide how and if they want to grow and the types of residents they want to attract. So the numbers will say one thing, but ultimately it's somewhat up to the communities themselves. And again, they're going to be influenced by the decisions of their neighbors. If one community decides they do not want high growth patterns or high growth rates in their community, they can do things that will change that, but it will likely push some of that growth into another part of the corridor or another part of the county. So what happens in one community is certainly going to influence what happens to its neighbors as well. And there's all sorts of tools that can be implemented. I'm not endorsing any of these or saying that they shouldn't be used. But there are things that are available to communities in terms of zoning restrictions and encouraging different types of developments that target millennials or target an aging community, marketing, financial incentives, lot size restrictions, and so on and so forth. These are all things that communities can consider when they want to try and influence their growth. And because of the unknown nature of projections going forward, I think it's highly useful for communities to benchmark key indicators of growth in their community. There's a lot of data out there. There are a lot of data out there that can be used by communities, things like traffic counts and building permits and school enrollment levels and demand for county services and emergency calls. All these things are almost real-time indicators of what's happening in a given community in terms of population change. So these are numbers that can be used to look at how a community may be changing and whether or not the population projections that are being developed are reflecting what's happening in reality. Let's move a little bit from population into economic development. And I think this is a good transition because when we think about where people decide where to live, one of the things they decide on is how long their commuting time is going to be and also how many jobs they have accessible to them within a given drive time of where they're deciding to live. And again, this is just one factor that people use when deciding where to live. There are many other things that go into this, anything from home values to school quality to quality of life and so on and so forth. But it is an important consideration when thinking about access to jobs in the corridor and the county. So one of the things that we did was to model how accessibility to jobs would change before and after the river crossing was completed. So we looked at the number of jobs that were available within different drive times, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and 45 minutes, before the river crossing was completed, and looking at the penalty that typically occurs in travel time. And then once we remove that barrier, how many jobs are available within these drive times after that. And these are based on morning commute times, so these are peak commute times as well. So they still recognize that there will be traffic congestion in other parts of the metro area, despite the river crossing being completed. So if we look at the number of jobs accessible before and after the river crossing completing from Holton, so we're right at the foot of the bridge, the number of jobs within a 15-minute drive time, 30-minute drive time, and 45-minute drive time, we can see that the number of jobs increases dramatically in terms of the accessibility of those jobs within primarily the metropolitan area. Especially within 45 minutes, we see the number of jobs within a 45-minute drive time more than double after the bridge crossing has been completed. So that is a huge barrier that's lifted for a number of commuters and potential commuters going forward. The thing that we need to consider here, though, is that even with this barrier removed, there are other places within the metropolitan area that are, have even greater accessibility than a community like Holton. So if we hit the next one. This compares the number of jobs accessible from Holton after the river crossing completion, and also compares it to the number of jobs accessible within similar drive times from Shakopee, Minnesota. And we use Shakopee because that's often used as a comparison because it sits at the foot of the Bloomington Ferry Bridge, and it's another community locally within the metropolitan area. So even after the travel barrier's been lifted, the bottleneck's been lifted, and the river crossing's complete, a place like Shakopee still has more jobs available within these drive times than a community like Holton. So the additional accessibility is very important, it's very beneficial, but the reality is that corridor communities will also have to compete for residents on other characteristics as well, other than just accessibility. Things like school quality, things like housing costs, things like quality of life, things like job availability, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. We also need to realize that population growth in communities is going to drive demand for certain goods and services. That as people come in and reside in a community, they're going to bring additional income with them that will spur demand for all sorts of types of goods and services. Primarily, these demands are going to come in retail categories, hospitality categories, healthcare, construction, real estate, and personal services. Looking at a 10-year projection, depending upon which model we use, the two models that Tom talked about, the new income from residents will generate approximately 750 to 850 private sector jobs alone over the next decade or so within these sectors. One of the issues that need to be considered, though, is that even though people may have this money in their communities, there has to be opportunities for them to spend that money locally. And if we look at sales tax revenues in different retail and service categories for St. Croix County, we do see a notable amount of leakage going out of the community. That is, people are spending money in other parts of the metro area or other parts of Wisconsin. And some of this may be due to commuters. So they may be spending some of their income closer to their place of work than they're closer to their place of residence. So along with this new population growth will come income, but there has to be a plan to try and develop businesses that capture this new spending. And certainly with new population and new households comes additional costs as well. So new households in a community will create additional demand for protective services. They'll create new additional demand for public infrastructure. They'll create new additional demand for school districts. So we have to realize that with growth comes costs as well. So one of the things that we've tried to do is develop a series of spreadsheets that will help people identify what some of these costs of community services may look like going forward based on different assumptions that a community may make, based on the type of population that may be coming in, and based on capacity that they already have in some of their community infrastructure. Just as a rule of thumb, and this doesn't mean that this will be true going forward necessarily, but over the past 2 decades, St. Croix County has had approximately 45 to 50 local government employees for every 1,000 residents. And when I say that, that's not just local government in terms of St. Croix County government itself. That is all the school districts, that's public administration at the local level, that's protective services, that's public works. That is across every administrative unit in the county of St. Croix, so not just St. Croix County itself. That said, that ratio, that 45 to 50, again, it could be different going forward. That's typically lower than you've seen in some of the other comparable communities that we looked at. It's lower than the ratio we saw in Scott County, and it's also lower than we saw in the Discovery Bridge project in Missouri. So just something to keep in mind. When we look at economic development opportunities that will occur from the corridor's perspective and from the county's perspective, there's a good chance that this will occur in an incremental manner. While relocations of large firms to the corridor may happen because of the bridge, they're probably less probable for a couple of reasons that I'll go into here in a second. The reality is that most job growth in the region and the county is driven by expansions of existing businesses and by new startups. And a lot of these expansions and startups occur in smaller businesses. They may occur in larger businesses as well, but for the most part, they tend to be small. And I'll show you some data on this just here in a second. Large-scale relocations do occur, but are relatively infrequent compared to firms of other sizes. And again, I'll show you some numbers here in a second. And the reality is, because of those trends, communities should be prepared to offer space to smaller businesses and entrepreneurs. These individuals have a lot of needs that are going to be need to be provided by communities, or not just by communities themselves, but by resources in the region or throughout the state. They'll need access to broadband services. They'll need technical assistance. They'll need assistance in workforce development, and they'll need access to capital. So let's look at this in a little more detail. Let's go to the next slide. We can break down components of job growth into three different areas of net job growth. We can look at net job growth that occurs through expansions of existing companies. So existing companies that are adding businesses minus those that are subtracted, or minus those that are losing businesses. So if you have more companies that are adding, existing companies that are adding employees than those that are losing them, we have a net growth in expansions. We can also look at growth that occurs through net openings. So jobs that are created by businesses opening versus those that are closing. You can go to the next one. So we see the share there from net expansions, the dark blue line, and then the share of job growth that occurs from net openings. We can also look at the job growth that's created through the net relocations of existing businesses. Businesses moving in or out of a given county. And go to the last one here. And here, oh, I'm sorry, you go back one. And here we see that for all counties in the Minneapolis-St. Paul MSA, the vast majority of jobs are created by existing firms and by new firms that are starting. Even in the fastest growing counties like Scott County, we see the vast majority of jobs are from net startups and are from net expansions. Relocations do occur, and they are an important part of economic development. I would never say that we should not be focusing on industry attraction or relocations. That's a very important part of economic development, but most of it does come from existing firms and from new firms. We can also look at this in terms of how business expansion, contractions, and relocations occur among firms of different employment sizes. So we can break this down into 5 different categories, and this comes from the Edward Lowe Foundation, who has done a lot of work in stage 2 high growth companies. And we can look at self-employed companies. We can look at what are so-called stage 1 companies, companies that typically have 2 to 9 employees, that are typically smaller partnerships or startups that are still trying to get some footage, or might be a lifestyle business. We can look at stage 2 businesses, which tend to have 10 to 99 employees, larger firms, which are stage 3, 100 to 499, and then very large firms, which are stage 4, 500 or more employees. Okay, next slide, please. This looks at establishments relocating to the Minneapolis MSA by these different business stages. And this looks at number of establishments relocating in a given year, starting in 1995, going up to the year 2013. If you hit the first one. These are the number of relocations of self-employed individuals. And we can see a fairly large number starting in about 2000, dipping it down a bit in the mid-2000s, and then skyrocketing really with the recession. That makes a lot of sense. And then dipping back down. This is stage 1. So a lot of relocations occurring among stage 1 firms. Let's go to stage 2. We see a similar amount, but lower amount, or similar trend, excuse me, but a lower amount. We see a gradual increase in relocations of stage 2 firms. That's stage 3. And the next one, stage 4. So within the entire Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, firms relocating from outside the metro area, inside the metro area, there is a very few number of large firms doing that in a given year. And that also means that you're in competition with many, many, many other communities around the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area that are also trying to attract those same firms. We can also look at this from another perspective. These are what are called expansion startups. So these are essentially spin-offs of existing firms. These are existing companies that may be starting a new location, a new establishment, a new franchise, or something like that. Let's look at these, a similar trend. They're self-employed, very few. Stage 1 kind of bounces around. Stage 2 has been very high over the last couple of years in terms of the total number of expansion startups. Stage 3 has been relatively low, and stage 4 is fairly low again. So that does not mean that these relocations of large firms do not occur. They do. They're important to communities. They're big wins for communities. But a lot of the growth occurs from these smaller businesses that are both expanding or starting out. It's also important to realize that if we look at the distribution of employment across these different stages, that most employment is also concentrated in small businesses. So this looks at the total employment by establishment stage from 95 to 2012 in the United States. So if we hit the first one, that's the total number of employees that are found in self-employed establishments. Stage 1, very large number. Stage 2, by far the highest number of employees are found in Stage 2 firms, these small to mid-sized firms. Stage 3, and Stage 4. The number of employees in Stage 4 firms has actually been declining since the '01 recession, which makes a lot of sense. Big firms are not necessarily growing through adding employees, they're growing through creating new efficiencies, new levels of productivity that do not necessarily include new employees. If we look at St. Croix County, the distribution is very, very similar. The vast majority of employees are found in these Stage 2 firms, these 10 to 99 employee firms, and they're also Stage 1, and you see the gradual growth in the number of individuals employed in Stage 1 firms. So again, large relocations do occur. Large companies are very, very important to our communities, but a lot of the economic activity that occurs in terms of expansions and startups tend to be in these small to mid-sized firms. One thing that the crossing does do is it creates better connections, obviously, between St. Croix County and corridor communities with the entire metropolitan area. It removes that bottleneck and allows goods and services and commuters to travel more efficiently from corridor communities into the metropolitan area and to markets and customers there. And one of the things we looked at is how freight flows in and out of the metropolitan area for freight that's transported on trucks. And this is from the Federal Highway Administration, and they've actually looked at where the major freight corridors are across the United States. And if you look at that distribution, those dark lines, those dark red lines are the major freight corridors for the entire United States. And you'll notice that a lot of the freight traffic in terms of major freight corridors that flows out of the Twin Cities flows to the southeast. It flows to places like Chicago, it flows to Indianapolis, it flows to the eastern seaboard through Chicago and other large metropolises throughout the eastern part of the United States. That said, there is a fair amount of freight traffic that does go west. It goes to the Great Plains states, it goes out to Seattle and gets put on container ships to be transported overseas. But the vast majority of it travels southeast rather than to the west. So what's that mean for the crossing? What that means is it does not necessarily create additional opportunities if you are a company that's trying to look at transporting freight to the west. If you're looking at transporting freight to the east, you can already be on the Wisconsin side of the river crossing. If you're trying to transport freight to the west, despite the fact that the river crossing has lower congestion and increased accessibility to the metro area, it still means you need to traverse the entire metropolitan area to get your freight to the other side of the metro area. So there are opportunities on the western side of the metro area to access western markets if those are your key markets. Doesn't mean that you don't serve many markets, but again, it does not necessarily provide a great comparative advantage for transporting freight in between metropolises across the country. That said, I mentioned that it creates better connections to the metro area. So if you are a company that is trying to serve customers in the metropolitan area, it does lower resistance. So a lot of firms that may be trying to reach customer bases in the metropolitan area could find a comparative advantage because of the crossing. So what it does is that if you're a firm like a metal fabricator or plastics fabricator that depends upon just-in-time type delivery or quick order turnarounds, you can probably benefit from locating next to the crossing because it lowers that accessibility issue. It also provides access to these large industry clusters that are present in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. And by industry clusters, I mean these are specializations that are kind of foundations of the regional economy. So industries like medical devices, lighting and electrical equipment, processed food, metal manufacturing, financial services, publishing and printing, and so on and so forth. These are very key driving industries of the metro area economy that have been identified. And because of the crossing, you may find opportunities to better serve or be part of these key industry concentrations in St. Croix County. And you're already heavily dependent upon them or part of them already, but again, you have better access to some of them now. Just an example.
Matt?
Yes.
Just in the interest of time, could we wrap up within the next few minutes? Because
We're very close to the end.
cool, thank
very
you.
much. Yep. So if you just go to the next one. This just shows the concentration of food manufacturing, food processing, and you do see the metro area as one of the, not greatest concentrations, but a very high concentration. So that's a core industry that if you're a supplier to that industry in terms of a wholesaler or other types of good or service provider, you may find better access to those firms because of the crossing. Next slide. Why don't we skip over that one and just go to the next one. The other thing that the crossing does is that it certainly creates accessibility to jobs in the metro area for commuters, but we have to remember that the bridge goes both ways. That it also increases accessibility to labor in the metropolitan area as well. And one of the things that's a true strength of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area is that it has one of the highest levels of educational attainment in terms of individuals with a college degree among large metro areas in the entire country. In fact, it's ranked about 10th in terms of large metro areas with the share of its individuals that have a college degree or higher. And you'll see the top 25 there in Minneapolis highlighted in red. So what this does is it provides access to a very educated labor force in the metro area as well. If we go to the next slide. One of the things that we find is that some of the industries that have high concentrations of college graduates tend to be industries like professional, scientific, and technical services. And if you look at the share of employment in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area, it has a higher share of individuals working in those industries than St. Croix County. It's almost twice as much right now in terms of the share of individuals in professional, scientific, and technical services. So why not have an opportunity when you provide access to a very highly educated workforce throughout the metro area to grow some of these industries locally as well, because you have access to that talent. Next one. Another one is financial and insurance employment. And again, the share of total employment in Minneapolis-St. Paul, it tends to be quite a bit higher than we see in St. Croix County on a relative basis. But again, you have access to those individuals now, in part because of the river crossing. It provides better access to talent. Finally, I want to wrap up with a couple other economic development observations. And again, there are more in the final report, but just want to highlight a little bit about the bike and pedestrian trail and what that might mean for economic development opportunities. There's a fair amount of research out there that looks at bike and pedestrian trail economic impact. And certainly it generates economic impact from users, people that are using the bike trail, spending money in local businesses and traveling to the communities to use those trails. It also creates quality of life considerations as people are looking at a community. This might be an amenity that may attract them or help attract them to a community. But until the trail system is fully built out and until there are businesses in place to take advantage of them on the Wisconsin side, these economic impacts will be developed probably down the road a little bit more. Right now, the trail system has much more access to businesses in Stillwater, in downtown Stillwater, than it does on the Wisconsin side. But as the trail system is developed and put in place, there may be opportunities to build businesses and other types of opportunities to create that spending on the Wisconsin side as well. But again, that has to happen down the road. And finally, we're looking at all these economic development trends that are occurring and perhaps opportunities going forward. And as with population growth, that does not mean that you do not have the opportunity to shape economic development in your own communities. Again, there are potential opportunities to accommodate large firms. You have to be ready for them. And again, you have to realize that local communities do have opportunities to shape these strategies moving forward as well. And with that, I believe that's, final points, sorry. Final points of emphasis, just to hit on some of the things we talked about briefly today. You have an opportunity to shape what's going to happen going forward. I would suggest monitoring what's going on in communities, benchmarking, so we can respond to things in more real time than waiting as things occur going forward. Over planning today, fostering cross-community collaboration among different communities across the corridor, and again, maintaining realistic expectations. Relying on some of the information that's here and relying on what we're seeing in communities going forward. And with that, I thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Tom as well for his work on this project. He's been a very tremendous asset to this. And do we have a few minutes for questions?
Are there any questions from either the public or the board? I do, oh yes, go ahead.
So what's your gut tell you? Are we going to have net a loss of migration still for the next 5 years, like some of the models show, or is it going to be more like the state model? Or you're just going to say, I don't know?
My wife usually tells me not to trust my gut, but I think that's probably a question that Tom can better answer than I can. Not trying to throw Tom under the bus, but he is one that has developed these projections more so than I have.
His gut tells him to punt. It's one of these kind of things that there is uncertainty, and we live in a very uncertain world. But here, at least, we would know pretty soon. Completion of the bridge, you should know within the first year. If you start seeing a lot of growth, a tremendous amount of growth, I think you're going to be on that higher curve. It in part depends on what's going to happen to the national and global economies, the housing market. There are just so many unknowns. But I think at least this brackets a most likely scenario, and you should know very quickly after the completion of the bridge as to which line you're going to be jumping onto.
Are there any other questions?
So, yeah, right. So we tried to keep our emphasis on those 8 communities. So we didn't really look specifically at Hudson. I mean, certainly access with Highway 35 up to the new crossing, could spur some, and 94. I think the issue with Hudson is because you already have the 94 crossing. I don't know how the river crossing will influence those commuting patterns somewhat. Mm-hmm. It does. It pushes commuters down to the I-94 crossing. So it'll relieve congestion undoubtedly. And but in terms of population or economic growth, we again focused on those 8 municipalities in the county.
Are there any other further questions? Supervisor Berkey?
Jill.
Just one other question with respect to tourism and hotel, motel accommodations. What kind of trend do you see happening with respect to these communities that you have highlighted, if any?
I think that a lot of it goes into where communities want to place their emphasis. So if they do want to try and emphasize tourist attraction, tourist development, that's going to depend upon whether or not they want to highlight their assets, how they want to market those assets. So it's going to be, I think, shaped more by the individual communities and how they decide to respond to the crossing.
Supervisor Rain?
Just on that note, the committee that reviewed this included a public and private sector group of people who got a preview of some of this information, and we often felt like we were drinking from a fire hose, and if that's how you feel today, I understand. I think the whole idea behind this was to help give, again, public and private entities a baseline of information for what impacts this might have. And what we see is that in the 8 communities we've identified, that about 50% of the projected growth is going to go there. And so there is a lot of pressure to figure out where do you want to be on that continuum. I see Chris Strait from the West Central Regional Planning Commission is here, and he's doing the comprehensive plan for the town of Somerset. So that's an example. I see a lot of Bike and Pedestrian Coalition members here. I think what this information does is provide some idea of what are the things from a policy standpoint should we be considering, and we want to just get that information out there just to identify what the impacts of the bridge might be. There will be another public presentation made by Matt coming up in the city of New Richmond, which will be held in the evening, and so there will be more opportunities for questions and to have the public respond there. But on behalf of the committee, and the board, really appreciate your work, and thank you very much. Matt, it's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If there's no other questions, thank you to both Matt and Tom for a good presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And at this time, I'll ask the board, would you like a 10-minute recess? We'll go into recess then until 5 after.
I think I mentioned this at one of the committee meetings. I can't remember which one, but just a note of appreciation to all departments at this time of year for a big part of the department head's responsibility is managing their individual budgets, and it makes my job a whole lot easier when department managers are keeping a close eye on expenditures and revenues. As we go through the budget process, as we just did, you can see how tight things are financially within departments. There's not a lot of area where departments can rely on as a cushion in departments. In better economic times, we would allow more flexibility within departments, but things are pretty lean. So these budgets it's even more critical to keep a fine eye on the bottom line for each of these departments. So, and it's their job as department heads to do that, reporting up through me and the finance director for financial management. But thank you to all the department heads for 2014 budgets as we begin process of end of year. But it's a good report financially to the county board that the bottom line looks good with expenditures and revenues for the month. Any questions? Yes, Supervisor Ochterhoff.
Yeah, actually 3, they're all on page 72. Pay for performance. We've only spent 19,000 out of over 300,000. And there were 3 areas in there. And then unemployment compensation, we've spent a lot more than what we budgeted. And then with the sales tax revenue, maybe because we're getting all that at the end of the year, but those 3 had me concerned.
The pay for performance, I believe that is, those funds are allocated in a separate fund and will be transferred out closer to the end of the year. Tammy, do you want to speak to that, how that transfer takes place?
Ms. Hanson has no voice. She said the journal entries were just done, so they're paid in department budgets and then they have to journal entry them because we keep it into one pot of money. The same would be unemployment because those are paid as they occur, and so they do one journal entry at near the end of the time or as they occur. Sales tax, same thing. Money's still pending, so.
But when was the pay for performance? I thought we did that in July.
It was paid in July.
But according
the
to
one
this,
time and then the base adjustments, so then they have to allocate those wages even on the base adjustments because they all need to be paid out of the general pay for performance fund, even though they occur, say, in the HR department, in the facilities department. So the final payrolls are just occurring, and that's where they're making those journal entries from.
so even if they were paid in July, it still
Well,
hasn't been recorded?
I think if your base changed though in July, you continue to get that higher wage now that wasn't budgeted for the rest of the year. So there are one-time payments that happen in July. Those are easy. The base adjustments for 2014 need to come from the pay for performance fund. For 2015, those become department salaries. Does that make sense?
No, but I'll talk to
You and
Tabitha
I and
later.
Tabitha
I'll
can
talk
chat.
later.
Okay.
If you-
deadline in front of you. It's budget only. It's budget only. The expenditures are coming out every month, but the pay performance line is allocating the budget dollars to each department, so the actual expenditures are occurring. It's the budget catch-up. Don't make me do that.
No, that's what I said off the toilet.
Yeah. We have to budget for a new voice for our finance director. I hope it's in the budget.
There are any other questions for the financial report? If not, we can move on.
Any other questions?
No other questions?
No, that's
Thank
it for
you.
my report.
Thank you for that report.
Yeah.
Now we'll move forward to our annual department reports and child support. And Katie is up.
Katie had to step out. She'll be back. She had an appointment outside of the board, but so we'll move on to emergency support.
Okay.
I promise I'll be brief.
Oh, jeez.
Sorry. Thought it would work twice. Thank you for allowing me to present our annual report. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, and County Board members, I need to start off with an element of appreciation for our parent committee, public protection, as well as the full county board for their continued support in our operation. I'm the Director of Emergency Support Services, which is a combination of both emergency communications and emergency management. Emergency communications, we serve the needs of not only the citizenry, but also 37 different police, fire, and EMS agencies within our county. That's 37. We are truly the definition of a consolidated 911 center within our county, and we have been so for decades. We've had many positive things happen throughout the year, and I'll quickly highlight those without a presentation of PowerPoint. Emergency management, we're responsible for not only the mandatory reporting facilities within our county that have met thresholds of hazardous chemicals. There are over 30 facilities within our county that have hazardous materials on site and are required by state law to report not only the amount but the location of those chemicals, and then we coordinate that information with fire and EMS and law enforcement agencies so they are up to date as to what they're possibly responding to. But we also have responsibilities related to training, securing grants for hazardous chemical training for our fire and EMS agencies and personnel. In emergency management, we also operate under what's called our plan of work, which is a state-imposed set of responsibilities which allow us to then recover close to $75,000 worth of operational costs in order for us to meet our plan of work. That's the incentive. We meet the state-imposed plan of work, we qualify for the grant reimbursement. As far as goals and objectives received throughout the year, the 911 Center, it's very hard not to be like a proud child of the 911, a proud parent of the 911 Center. What we've done there in a very short amount of time is very impressive in my mind and remarkable. We've gone from a 440 square foot environment to now over a 1,600 square foot environment. We're poised to handle the responsibilities and challenges of the future, and I believe we've done it right. We've done it with a lot of cooperation from a lot of internal departments, and we've done it with a vision for not only our needs, but also possibly the needs related to a consolidation of sorts in the future. I think the county's in very good shape from a construction standpoint and our facility standpoint, and now we're moving on into phase 2, which I've identified in a little bit for challenges of the future. In emergency management, we've continued our training opportunities. We've continued to structure and receive grant dollars to, in order to afford training for a lot of communities that can't budget for it. We've also been challenged with some disaster situations from a disaster recovery standpoint. We secured over $366,000 in disaster recovery funding for flooding to numerous townships and communities within our county. And the April of 2014 winter freeze, the flash flooding in June of 2014. And we've also implemented Chris Strait was here a little while ago, with the help of Chris Strait and his associates, an all-hazard mitigation plan, which was adopted by all our communities within St. Croix County. Knowledge sharing, we continue to try to put out there the ability for citizens to empower themselves from a preparedness standpoint to a responsibility standpoint, reporting standpoint of 911. We are very active, and there are a lot of resources that are committed to accidental dialing of 911 with cell phones. We continue to try to promote awareness from the public and understanding that burden on our center as well as the law enforcement community within the county. Within the annual report shows the numbers related to our budget. I'll leave that for questions if you have any at the end. And now for our future. We're now replacing our infrastructure. You've allowed us, through your support, what I believe to be the very important need for our infrastructure, which has been out of date, aging, and very unreliable for the last 3 to 4 years. And we're now poised to replace that through what I call a phase 2 of our infrastructure replacement. We're increasing our backbone for public safety communications throughout the county, where 20 years ago when this concept was developed, we didn't have the population in the areas of the county we currently do, and the need to communicate to law enforcement, police, EMS, and fire in those areas is critical to their safety and well-being. And now we're ready to actually solve that problem. It's very exciting. We're implementing a new phone system for our 911 center. That will be done by February of 2015. We're implementing a program called Emergency Medical Dispatching, which provides citizens with pre-arrival instructions when they call for an ambulance. Currently in the state of Wisconsin, only 17% of the 911 centers provide structured EMD, and we're about to join that minority. The 911 industry at the state level needs a complete overhaul. We're very supportive of that, and in a short time, you'll see a resolution before you for consideration, which identifies part of the problem related to the 911 industry at the state, and we can talk more about that at the time. I'll open it up for questions if you have any questions on our annual report.
Thank you, Casey, and I'm happy to see the EMD finally coming to fruition. I think the first time I was on the board, we first started looking at it, I think, in 2009, if I'm correct. So it's taken a while to get us that far, and I thank you and staff for that. And then I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on MABUS, if you would.
MABUS stands for Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. It's a structured, concerted response from all of the fire agencies. Prior to MABUS, which is the acronym, they just operated on mutual aid responses. So the incident commander would arrive at a scene and determine the severity of the incident, and then start ordering resources a la carte. They would want a tanker, a ladder, a tender, all sorts of things in their vernacular that they would order, and it would come basically the spur of the moment to support whatever they believe they needed to fight the fire or handle the incident. What MABUS does is it pre-arranges all of that. It takes the guesswork out of the incident commander's decision-making. They have predetermined resource availability from their community neighbors. They've torn down their silos. This whole process has been about 1.5 years in the making. St. Croix County is officially Division 143 of MABUS, where fire agencies have now come together to share resources, and when a larger scale incident occurs, they'll strike a box alarm. And then that tells our dispatch center exactly what resources and what location to go and get those resources. And it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. It takes a lot of the spur-of-the-moment thinking out of it. And other agencies also know what resources they have to commit. So it's great evidence of a partnership coming together and tearing down the silos that we used to have in the fire discipline, with all the different agencies, you know, just kind of handling things on their own. Now they've all come together to share resources. It's a very excellent program, and we're looking forward to seeing the results of that.
Thank you, and thank you and the staff and all the fire departments as well.
Any other questions for Casey at this time?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Casey. We'll move on to medical examiner, Patty.
Hello and thank you. I'm Patty Schochner. I'm the medical examiner here in St. Croix County. I just wanted to give you just a brief overlook of our department. A judge once told me in regards to the medical examiner, nobody wants you at our door. Nobody wants to be your friend because you're the one that writes your life's final chapter. So that is pretty much what we do. We are there. There's no positive outcome when the medical examiner comes to the house. So with that in mind, I just kind of want to give you a brief overlook of how our department has grown. Last year, we had a total of 409 deaths. This year so far through dispatch, we've had 504 calls and 459 deaths registered as of November 23rd. Of them, about 10% have been ruled unnatural. Of those, 20 have been ruled accidental, 14 suicides, 3 undetermined, and 5 of them are pending toxicology. 2/3 of our unnatural deaths are due to drug addiction and drug-related deaths. It's a huge problem right now. Yes, there is a heroin problem, but there is also a prescription drug problem here in St. Croix County. And this has a direct effect on our budget. We are, as of this morning, we are now at 33 autopsies. We budgeted for 24. You know, our department is going to be over budget, and just looking forward, I didn't project enough autopsies for next year. So this is something you all have to be prepared for. The prescription drug problem, when you start looking at it as to do we have access to all these drugs in St. Croix County, what I did was I started looking at where do we have access to drugs. And I looked at the dentists, the vet clinics, assisted living, hospice, and palliative care in St. Croix County. And this is from January to June of 2014. And this is accessibility, prescription drugs in St. Croix County. So as you can see, no municipality in St. Croix County does not have access. This directly affects our kids because we don't have a whole lot of education out there. When you think about how Mr. Yuck was part of education and what that meant to us growing up, we don't do that anymore. We don't just say no, we don't have any of that education. So prevention is the key to the drug problem in St. Croix County. And even when talking with Sheriff Schultz and other law enforcement, this is a problem that we're going to have to work on collectively and collaboratively with all agencies in St. Croix County. One of the things I'm hoping to start is to combine the Suicide Prevention Coalition and the Drug Coalition. So instead of having a lot of people doing the same thing, we can start collaborating and getting a unified message out there, and then start working with the school districts and local communities on drug prevention. That's really the main focus of our office right now. We are seeing addiction affect many, many lives in many, many different ways, and we have lots of community members who are professionals, who are educated people who are living with addiction every day and trying to get these people to be a part of the conversation and not be ashamed of what they've been living with for many, many years is going to take a lot of work from all of us. So do you have any questions for me?
Are there any questions? If none, thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Good report, appreciate it. Move on to Sheriff's Annual Report. John Schultz.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. I don't think Patty gives herself or her agency enough credit when she said that there's never a positive outcome when her agency's involved. I would say that there's a lot of positive experiences because of the way that they treat families with dignity and respect. So she deserves a little more credit than she was willing to take here. I have obviously submitted my annual report to you in advance of today's meeting, and I plan to be pretty brief as far as the statistics or the outline that I put together in that presentation for you. My main message is one of thanks to you collectively as a board, you individually as representatives of your districts within the county, and thanks to the various other agencies that make up St. Croix County government. My office enjoys widespread support and understanding from each and every one of you, which is evidenced by your choice to actually give us funding for 2 new positions for next year. That went through the budgeting process. You supported that. And that goes right in line with what Medical Examiner Schachner indicated. We've got an issue in St. Croix County with prescription drugs, with heroin. I included part of the business plan for the use or for how we're going to use those additional personnel in 2015 and beyond. You'll see that my plan is to create what we're going to term a crime suppression unit. We've already identified one of the areas, which is, again, is this drug abuse. We're going to focus on that. And we're going to add those resources specifically to that problem. It's not going to be just an arrest situation, but these officers will be going into the communities to help educate as well. So we're gonna try and come at this issue from all angles, and I appreciate your support on that. You know, I don't often get up in front of any group and speak about controversial issues unless I'm asked. But we've got one that's been brewing in the country for a while now, and that's the relationship and the situation that we see law enforcement and the people in and around Ferguson, Missouri dealing with, as well as a few other areas in the country. And it makes me thankful that I'm in law enforcement in the area that I am. Law enforcement doesn't work without the trust, public trust, between the people that law enforcement serves and then that reciprocated back towards their law enforcement. It has to be a transparent operation. We have to work together, we have to communicate, and you know, a lot of things that you see on the news lately anger me. People don't always think about their words before they speak, and sometimes it adds fuel to the fire. And I realized and again wanted to make sure that I thank all of you for the strides that you've taken to support us. One of my jobs is to manage my staff through that. I can tell you that what you see on TV does have an effect on my staff. These men and women go out every day and they try to do the best that they can, and when you come home at night and turn on the news, or when you see a paper, or when someone comments to you at a line in a restaurant about, you know, these happenings and this distrust, it can be deflating. But you folks, I don't know if you realize it or not, how much of a difference you've made. I'd like to take 2 minutes. I've got a video here that was made quite a while ago. It's narrated by Paul Harvey, so that'll tell you how old it is. But a lot of the issues in law enforcement seem to be reoccurring. And again, we're going to go back to that public trust. How well is that relationship working? And I'd like you to pay attention, because as we go through this video, hopefully it becomes apparent to you some of the areas that you, just in the last year as a board, have addressed with the local law enforcement communities that let them know that they're supported. We hold them to a standard, and that's clear to them. You hold them there and I hold them there, and that's great. We need that message. But then in some of the areas that we'll talk about or that you'll see on this video, again, I I can't tell you how far that goes to helping me to be able to manage through and serve the people of St. Croix County.
Policeman. A policeman is a composite of what all men are, I guess, a mingling of saint and sinner, dust and deity. What that really means is that they are exceptional, they are unusual, they are not commonplace. Buried under the froth is the fact, and the fact is that less than 0.5% of policemen misfit that uniform, and that is a better average than you'd find among clergymen. What is a policeman? He of all men is at once the most needed and the most wanted, a strangely nameless creature who is sir to his face and pig or worse behind his back. He must be such a diplomat that he can settle differences between individuals so that each will think he won, but if a policeman is neat, he's conceited. If he's careless, he's a bum. If he's pleasant, he's a flirt. If he's not, he's a grouch. He must make instant decisions which would require months for a lawyer, but if he hurries, he's careless. If he's deliberate, he's lazy. He must be first to an accident, infallible with a diagnosis. He must be able to start breathing, stop bleeding, tie splints, and above all, be sure the victim goes home without a limp. The police officer must know every gun, draw on the run, and hit where it doesn't hurt. He must be able to whip two men twice his size and half his age without damaging his uniform and without being brutal. If you hit him, he's a coward. If he hits you, he's a bully. The policeman from a single human hair must be able to describe the crime, the weapon, the criminal, and tell you where the criminal is hiding, but if he catches the criminal, he's lucky. If he doesn't, he's a dunce. He runs files and writes reports until his eyes ache to build a case against some felon who will get dealed out by a shameless Seamus. The policeman must be a minister, a social worker, a diplomat, a tough guy, and a gentleman. And of course he'll have to be a genius because he'll have to feed a family on a policeman's salary.
Obviously, that last part doesn't pertain to you. You gave them what I thought was a very good compensation, a very good salary. But as we go through that, again, I just want to stress to you that you may not hear it, how much of a difference you can make in the attitude and the culture of the law enforcement officers in my office and, you know, any of the other municipal officers that are in the area as well. So for those benefits, on behalf of the men and women of my office, I thank you. I would entertain any questions about my annual report or anything, if there are any.
Supervisor Schober.
I'm looking at one of the graphs that you supplied under, and it's a graph on the number of drug investigations from 2012, 13, and 14, and I understand that 2014 isn't finished yet, but it looks like a remarkable drop in the number of drug investigations. Can you comment on that?
Actually, I would expect that we'll be at those 12 numbers or above. The unit has been busy. If that one gets me pretty much every year when I do the report. So I would tell you that it's unremarkable. I expect that we will be at the levels that we have been at the last couple of years.
Are there any other questions? None?
One of the things that might also help with your question, if you look at down under arrests, whether it be felony or misdemeanor arrests, you'll see that the number of arrests is actually maybe even a little more current number because of the reporting system, and you can see those are very close to our 13 numbers already, and we're still missing a quarter. So I would expect that the numbers of arrests will exceed what we had in 13.
Nobody? Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
At this point, I don't see Katie back yet, so we'll move on to the first resolution here for approving law enforcement services between the St. Croix County Sheriff and the town of Hudson. Andy, do you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I will turn this over to the sheriff, seeing how he is here.
Okay. You want to get a motion started first?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
I have a second to that? Seconded by Supervisor Osnes. Sheriff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution comes to you as at the request of the town of Hudson. It has obviously been vetted through our parent committee, that of Public Protection, who has now forwarded that to you, the county board, for action. We have two other contract arrangements with units of government within the county. Both are townships. Both are pretty much mirror with just a couple of language exceptions, this contract or proposal that's in front of you now. The town of Hudson has had an agreement with previous sheriffs in a similar type of arrangement, but unfortunately, as we kind of review our operations, we realized that we needed to update a couple of things. So we have worked for the town of Hudson in the past. It's a very specialized operation. They will call us or they will notify us and say, we need a deputy sheriff to work a particular issue. And if you look at the agreement, we're talking about noise issues that the town of Hudson has and parking complaints. If we're able to accommodate that, which we should be because it's not necessarily a lot of hours usually, we'll accommodate that with a full-time deputy at an agreed-upon contracted rate, which currently is $65 an hour. That's enough to cover the wage and fringes plus the expenses of operating a vehicle to the township. So it's something that the township is fully funding. There's not a line item in the budget because the townships, for this arrangement, it's kind of an in and out. They don't necessarily know at the beginning of the year how many hours they for sure want us to work. So again, we'll work and then they'll pay that fee, so it's that offset, so we don't have the impact to the budget.
Are there any questions? Supervisor Hanson.
Do you have a number of hours that would be your ceiling that you can afford within your schedule to allot to these contracts before you need to hire another sheriff's deputy?
Well, the way the arrangement is written is it's based upon the availability. So I do have the ability to say, I'm sorry, it doesn't work in this particular time frame. And we do use officers who are obviously off duty. It's extra duty for them. So we wouldn't use anyone who's on a regularly scheduled shift to take away from our normal duties. One of the things that we are monitoring, though, and that's a good question, Supervisor Hanson, is we're monitoring the number of hours that we use overall for all of our contracts. And again, currently, if this is approved, there will be 3. And at some point, if the hours come to the point where it makes sense to add staff, then that's something that we would go through administration, through the budgeting process, and then eventually end up with the board saying, look, we've got contracted hours enough to make sense to make this a full-time position. What do you think? So that's an action that would be up to, that budgeting process. But right now, we're not there.
Are there any other questions for the sheriff? This resolution? If there are no further questions on this resolution, we have a motion and a second on. So if we're ready to vote. And it was unanimous. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next resolution, which is a resolution supporting the state funding for 911 service, one designated public safety answer point per county. And I believe this comes from Public Protection 2. Supervisor Brinkman, your motion. I have a second and a second from Supervisor Kiesler. Now we'll forward with any information coming? Mr. Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. A little background for this resolution. Approximately 5 weeks ago, the Wisconsin County Association called for a meeting, and it was the third such meeting in the state of Wisconsin. This one for St. Croix County. Administrator Thompson, Chair Larson, and Supervisor Nelson, along with the sheriff and Senator Harsdorf and Representatives Knutson and Murtha attended the meeting, as well as Wisconsin County Association representatives and major stakeholders in the telecommunications industry in our area. We came together to discuss the need for reform for the 911 industry and support at the state level financially and statutorily for the industry. This resolution outlines a little bit of the history related to where we are, bringing us to where we are, as well as some concerns related to, without reform, where we may be going. And that, among other things, presents a financial burden. Once our contracts are renewed, our phone provider for our 911 system will expect, as they have in other counties for other 911 centers in the state, additional cost coverages, and that cost would come directly out of the levy. So this resolution outlines what the hope is, and this is not unique. The cost would be unique to St. Croix, the numbers, but from an attempt to get our voice heard at the state, there are several other counties that have adopted a similar resolution in hopes of returning the funding that each citizen sees on their phone bill, cellular or wireless, to the 911 industry as opposed to a shared revenue pot that the state used to bridge a gap that it once had years ago. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions that I can help hopefully clarify, I'll do my best.
Supervisor Osnes.
Casey, in the fourth whereas, the first line says, whereas should our provider elect to update our user fee contract. Do we know when that contract is going to be up at this point in time?
Hopefully they're not watching. The contract is up. The contract has expired as of 2008. We are operating on an expired contract. I'm certainly not calling them asking for an update because we're locked in at 26 cents per line. Our line numbers, and that's for a landline, that's a phone line at home. We estimate in St. Croix at 25,000 subscribers, and we're losing about 12.5% of those every year. So our numbers are going down that have that, what they call a bill and keep at 26 cents per line. And the cost for the phone provider is going up. So if we asked for a renewed contract, they estimate that renewal to be at 85 cents per landline subscriber. So that 85-cent jump, the law caps it at 40 cents. The state can only recover up to 40 cents. That's how old and archaic the statutory language is. So the county then is responsible for anything above that. So on an 85-cent estimate, 40 cents can go and be collected from the state. The extra 45 cents becomes the responsibility of the county. And that's estimated at $135,000 annually. And that will continue to rise because the subscriptions are going down 12.5% every year.
And that's strictly for the landline. That has nothing to do with cell phones at all.
That's correct. Landlines, according to the statute, current statute language, landlines are the only device that the state can attach this fee towards. They then adopted, in the late 2000s, statutory language that allowed for what they call the police and fire protection fee. The police and fire protection fee, which you'll find on cellular bills, goes directly to the shared revenue. The original intent of that fee was to help bridge that gap that we have in costs. And, I'm sorry?
And that in turn will be coming back home to us, correct?
Correct, very much so.
And we do
Currently
not
it's-
see that.
We don't, well, we see that in a form of shared revenue. It goes to the shared revenue, which then the state doles out to certain programs that are benefactors from shared revenue. But from a 911 industry standpoint, it does not. We do not see that. The bill and keep right now through the Public Service Commission is only on the 26 cents that we have on the tax levy, on the, on the taxes for the citizens, on landlines.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Keesler.
Just as a note, in terms of shared revenue, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Thompson, St. Croix County receives one of the lowest rates of shared revenue in the state because of some of the old formulas that were generated in terms of per capita wealth and all sorts of things. So when it goes to shared revenue and gets doled out, we take an additional hit for St. Croix County in relative to other counties within the state. We're ranked usually around 71, 72, 70, very, very low out of the shared revenue pot. So it's another reason that we need to kind of take a look at that or keep our eye on that.
Any other questions? If there's no further questions, we will be ready to vote. We have a motion and a second. And that was unanimous. Thank you. I see our child support person came back in. Katie's here, so we'll move back up there and have her annual report.
Thank you. Apologize for the delay. The 2014 annual report is before you. I always like delivering this report at the end of the year because our federal fiscal year has concluded, being that child support is funded through the federal government. And so all of our statistics are complete through the end of September, and we closed out the year quite successfully again, having exceeded all of the benchmarks that the state set forth for us via our contract. We've increased collections, as you can see, collections over $14 million, so approximately a $500,000 increase over last year. We say that, I think, has a pretty big fiscal impact for St. Croix County, not only for the families we serve and providing them with a reliable, stable income, but it also avoids the need for them to fall back on public assistance programs to support their families. Our budget has been good. I included in the report the fact that in the last biennium, funding had been restored. The prior biennium, the general purpose revenue that the state puts into the program had been cut in half. We were able to successfully get that restored statewide to $8.25 million. So we are in much better shape financially this past year than we were 2 years ago. And we'll be watching what happens in the legislature as they move to approve the budget this next year, hoping that funding remains secure. But internally, the budget is on track. It looks like our revenue will likely come in ahead of what we projected. So that's good news for us. I feel that we set out to accomplish everything we did this past year in terms of exceeding our performance benchmarks. We're looked at by our peers, meaning neighboring agencies in the state and even internal in St. Croix County, as being an innovative program, people that are very strategic thinkers and that can get work done. And that's reflected quite honestly by some of the service agreements and the context that we get to carry out services for other county child support agencies. And so when we get to the section of issues and concerns, I was hard pressed to actually come up with any really compelling problem that we're facing right now. I just feel very good about where we're at right now as a program. I'm not the type of manager that looks for perfection. I think you'll spend a lot of your life being disappointed if you expect perfection from everyone. But we keep getting better, and that's a reflection of the staff. They're very knowledgeable. they're hardworking, and they function as a team. And I think that's the core reason for the success in our department. So for the coming year, I want to continue to set that mark even higher for our child support collections, closing the gap on our delinquent cases, and improving on our paternity establishment. We want to continue our work with the service agreements. We want to engage in an effort on community awareness of the child support program through a variety of strategies. That's information sessions in the community, reaching out to some of the high schools, and that's considered a project on early intervention to make young people aware of the implications of child support if you choose to have a child or have difficulty supporting that child. And we want to start looking at possible vendors and researching the costs and what it would take to convert our records to an electronic format. The state hasn't gotten us there yet, and so we're going to start looking at some options internally. So with that, I want to thank all of you for the support we get for the program. As I said, I really feel very good about the direction that we're going, and I'm grateful for the staff that we have as well for producing such a successful program. And answer any questions for you.
Are there any questions? There's no questions. I'd like to thank everyone who gave their annual reports. Really good job today, so thank you very much. Now we'll move back into a resolution authorizing St. Croix County Community Development Department to apply for a 2015 lake planning grant. And do I have a motion to that effect from somebody? Supervisor Burke?
I move to move the resolution forward and accept it.
Okay, do I have a second? Second from Supervisor Babbitt. Any discussion? No discussion. Supervisor Trotner, do you have any information on that? You want to tell him to come up and,
Good morning.
good morning. Yes.
The lake protection grant or the lake management planning grant application would be in order to provide a update to the Bass Lake Management Plan and write a lake management plan for Perch Lake. Bass Lake and Perch Pit Lake are the two outstanding resource waters we have in St. Croix County, and this is a very good timing in order to do the update and to write the plan for the Perch Lake. At this time, the town of St. Joe is moving forward with doing a comprehensive plan. We would also have, this would fit in well with what activities that are going on with the Bass Lake Rehabilitation District. There's a lot of interest from Bass Lake residents. Mr. Tom Spaniel, the president of the Bass Lake Association, is also here. If you'd like to hear from him. And there's a great deal of support locally. This grant application is supported by the town of St. Joe, and I can pass out, it was not able to be in your packet, but this is a signed copy of their resolution of support, and the town of St. Joe is contributing $3,000 towards the matching amount for this grant. It's also supported by the town of Somerset, the Bass Lake Rehabilitation District, which is also contributing $2,000, and the St. Croix County Sportsman's Alliance, which is supporting it with $500, and the Friends of Perch Lake, which is supporting it with $200, and finally the Hudson Rod and Gun Club. So there's a great deal of support to have this be done. We do a lot of lake management plans around St. Croix County. Squaw Lake and a variety of others have all had lake management plans. These provide us with an opportunity to work with the whole watershed, with the property owners in the watershed, and talk about improvements and management strategies and specific activities on the land that can be done and that can improve or protect, or both, the water quality. And again, these are our two outstanding resource waters in the county, and so this is a very high priority for us. So if you have any questions, and I should mention also that St. Croix County is the sponsor of the grant. Our staff will do the fiscal management. We will also provide the input and coordination, but we will be outsourcing the actual work, and there will be no, due to the contributions from these organizations, there will be no actual financial cost on the levy to St. Croix County, other than staff time. Any questions?
Do I have any questions? No questions? There's a motion on the floor and a second.
My name is Tom Spaniel, and I want to just to be real brief here, thank you for allowing me a couple of seconds here to talk in support of this resolution. I'm currently a supervisor in the town of St. Joseph. I'm also the town of St. Joseph Board designee to the town of St. Joseph Parks, Trails, and Recreation Committee, of which recommended to the town board of St. Joseph by unanimous acclamation to approve this resolution that the town passed, as well as supporting it financially out of the Parks, Trails, and Recreation budget of about 20% of their budget, which is pretty significant. Yeah. Additionally, I think Ellen promoted me. I'm not the current president. I was an elected commissioner in the past, but I'm also the town of St. Joseph board representative of the Bass Lake Rehabilitation District, as well as a riparian owner on the lake. In addition to that, I'm also a recent graduate of the Lake Leaders Institute. Some of you may or may not know about that, but every 2 years, approximately 25 individuals from across the entire state are chosen, are recommended to attend a Lake Leaders Conference, several meetings. Like I said, just 25 people from across the entire state every 2 years. I just recently graduated about a month ago from that institute. And it's a joint venture between the University of Wisconsin Extension out of Stevens Point and the DNR. And, and as part of that, I took an oath that I'd do everything I possibly could to move this effort forward. So I'm trying to satisfy that requirement. We do have a lot of support from each one of those organizations that I mentioned. But one thing I think you need to be aware of as well, and that is this year, we're starting to get some riparian owners on Bass Lake stepping up and saying, hey, what's going on with my lake? Bass Lake, as Ellen mentioned, is an outstanding water resource. Of the 15,000 lakes in the state of Wisconsin, there's only 103 that have that designation. We happen to have 2 of the 103 in this county. And the next closest one is about 80 miles away. So that's pretty important to have that designation. We want to keep that designation. Part of the responsibility of the Bass Lake Rehabilitation District is to maintain the quality of that resource. What we found this year in May, we dropped a Secchi dish in, which we do several times during the year. That's just a around 12-inch disc that's got black and white, and you drop it down till the black and white sort of turn to gray, and you can't see it clearly, the demarcation between those two colors. And in early May, it was at 34 feet, which is the cleanest, the clearest the lake has ever been. 6 weeks later, however, 7 weeks later, however, the Secchi dish was 6 feet. So what happened in that time frame? Well, what happened? We got 12 inches of rain in the month of June, latter part of May and June. So, well, what did that do? Well, that created runoff. Since there is no inlet to Bass Lake, we can't blame it on anybody but the riparian owners. We have to stop that. And so now we're getting owners coming forward saying, what's wrong with my lake? Well, the answer is the runoff that's coming off your property. So how do we fix it? So the timing on this is absolutely perfect. If there's ever been an opportunity where the stars all align, it's right now. Because as Ellen mentioned, the town of St. Joseph is redoing its comprehensive plan and natural resource inventory plan. The town of St. Joseph hasn't done a natural resource inventory plan since 1996. So we're overdue on that one. Well, these lake management plans will be included in both the comprehensive plan and the natural resource inventory plan, so that timing is absolutely perfect. The timing is absolutely perfect for civic involvement around both of these lakes. Okay, as I mentioned, if riparian owners are coming forward and say, what's happening in my lake? Well, now is the time that you get civic involvement. And that's one of if we look back on our plan in Bass Lake that we wrote in 2009, we've had some major accomplishments since that time. But we've also had some minor setbacks, and that's the engagement, the civic engagement of all of the riparian owners, which is why now we can talk about it. We have enthusiastic support of the riparian owners to figure out what they can do. And so all that said, you can see that all our ducks are in a row. As a matter of fact, the geese left yesterday off the lake. And so I wholeheartedly ask your support of this. As a matter of fact, I'll be leaving here to go meet with the DNR on this issue at 1 o'clock in Baldwin. And I sure would like to go there and tell them, guess what? The county just passed the resolution. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Any questions? Supervisor Babbitt?
Maybe just a, excuse me, maybe just a brief comment. I'm the county representative on the Bass Lake Rehabilitation District and just wanted to underline also, Perch Lake has not ever had a lake management plan, and that's an exceedingly important part of this resolution too, to get that process going. For those of you that have not been to Perch Lake, it's worth the visit. It's a beautiful place. The facilities there, I think, are terrific, and so I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands Perch Lake is also a part of the lake management planning that the resolution refers to. So, thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other
Mr.
questions?
Babbitt for mentioning that.
Thank you for your information.
Thank you.
Now we have a motion and a second on the floor. If there's no further questions, I'll ask for a vote, please. And it was unanimous for who's here, so thank you, everyone. We'll move on to our next resolution. That's resolution authorizing Highway Department gravel pit land exchange with the Village of Somerset. And I'm looking for a motion. Supervisor
I'll move
Peavy
it forward.
and Supervisor Peterson, second it.
And Mr. Ramberg's up at the podium, so I'll let him finish, but this is a, excuse me, exchange of approximately 9 acres from the county to purchase 5 acres from the Village of Somerset. The 9 acres has been used by the county as much as we can, and it allows Somerset to, it clears up some easement issues. There's a waterway on the property, and the Village of Somerset wants some of the property for commercial enterprise, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Ramberg to finish up.
Thank you. Bill took care of most of the issues that you see in front of you, and if you want, you could pull the map up there for more explanation, but we ran this past the Transportation Committee. We've had about over a year's worth of conversations with Pat and Bill Rubin and ourselves in the village, and a company out of Somerset that wants to stay. And as a community development exercise, we also want that. But I'll try to be brief. I got 60 seconds and 6 points. I'll try to get it. Number one, the company that wants to expand, wants to stay in St. Croix County, does not want to move, and for the future, they want to be able to expand into our property, or into our pit property. We did not feel comfortable with dealing with a private entity like that. We prefer to deal with the village, and it's a win for the village if they purchase this or exchange this property from us for their purposes at their industrial park. And number two is the village's issues with the encroachment. It's closer to their heart to deal with the encroachments that are on here, that we can clean that up. We want to be a good neighbor, and they are in a better position to handle that. Number three, we want to apply our SMART goals and get some more material. The 5 acres contains a considerable amount of more material for us, to extend the pit into the future for local units of government and us, and then we can prepare with our SMARTs to be stocked, manned, and ready to serve. And that will help us in that effort as well. And then it lowers our liability on that encroachment. As we talked before, it's number 4. Number 5, clean up the street records. There haven't been, years ago, it wasn't properly recorded. And then the easement issue that it expired after 15 years as an old drainage easement that we can sell back to the village. So it's a win-win-win situation. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions? Supervisor Hanson.
So just to clarify, more gravel, less liability?
Yes, and housekeeping.
Any other questions? No further questions. We have a motion and a second on the floor. We'll vote. And that was unanimous with who was here, so thank you. Now we have the next resolution. File request for waiver from the state mandate pursuant to section 66.0143- mandate to provide audit report concerning health and human service purchase of care and services contract under section 46.036 and 49.34.
I'll move to approve.
Motion from Supervisor Keesler, and a second from Supervisor Trotner. We have a motion and a second on the floor.
Just a bit of background on this resolution. The Department of Human Services contracts. We have many contracts with providers. The state statute requires that any contracts that exceed between the department and a private provider that exceeds $25,000, that the provider is required by law to submit an annual audit and of their financials, along with a service audit. The state does allow for an exception to that. We have to apply for a waiver. We will apply for a waiver upon passage of this resolution that would request the state that any contracts that exceed $100,000 of total cost, that those contracts, those providers would be required to submit an annual audit. This will allow for enhanced services by these providers because they'll be able to allocate resources towards providing service rather than paying for expensive financial audits. Plus, it frees up some of our staff time because we spend approximately 3.5 to 4 hours per audit report just reviewing these things. So the Department of Human Services, the Health and Human Services Board has approved a resolution. It's before you this morning, which will allow the department to apply for a waiver so that our contracts that exceed $100,000, it increases the threshold from $25,000 to $100,000, which will trigger the requirement for a financial audit.
Supervisor Keesler.
And just to add, is it not true that if we want an audit, we can ask for it? So it doesn't exclude us from audits between 25 and 100,000. It's just waiving us. So there's no loss in doing it in my opinion.
Correct.
Supervisor Osnes? No. Okay. Any other questions? Supervisor Babbitt?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a couple of points about the language in the resolution, and I apologize if this went past me on HHS board before we got here, but there's a couple of wording corrections I wanted to at least propose. Line 11, whereas Wisconsin statute 46036, et cetera, requires, comma, among things, I thought should be among other things. Small change, but I've got a couple of other ones. On line 36, contracts through the Health and Human Services Department that are less than 100,000. I think what we want to say is more than 100, don't we? Less than 100 instead of 25,000 or more. Sounds kind of like the same thing. Don't we want to say more than 100 in that case or not?
I looked at that wording this morning. I think it's correctly worded, but.
So it is for less than 100,000.
It's kind of one of those reverse.
For less than 100,000.
Right.
You're waiving
So
audits of less than $100,000.
But the following line after that, it says, or more than 25,000.
And that sounds like the same thing to me.
Well, what I think it's trying to say is that between 25 and 100,000, those are being waived. So unless a contract is more than 100,000, you don't need an audit.
And that's what's, I think, throwing me, Supervisor Kiesler, is that we're really looking at audits for contracts above 100, right? And saying less than we don't want to audit anymore.
Right, but we have to ask for a waiver.
Right.
So what we're waiving is less than 100,000 and more than. We can't say more than 100,000 because that's not what we're looking to waive. We're looking to waive the audits more than 25 but less than 100,000.
So currently the waiver is less than 25. We're looking for a waiver.
So should you change the wording on line 37 to say less than 25 instead of more?
It confused me too, Supervisor Schachner. I had the same reaction in looking at that.
Well, that looks,
I think the correction would be on line 37 and not on line 36.
Perhaps so.
Well, the only other way I suppose to word it is to have a waiver of contracts less than 100,000. I suppose you could say that, but you don't need an audit for a contract less than 25,000. So I think what we're trying to do is specifically identify what we would need an audit for, which is the contracts of $25,000 and $1 up to $100,000 and waive that. I thought that's what was trying to do in the resolution.
Number 30 refers to exceed 100,000, so that is covered there. I'm okay with the way that is, actually. It's a little cumbersome, but.
yeah, so
What was Supervisor Shatner's correction?
Well, it's not an official correction yet because we're just talking it out, but I said it's because the waiver is going. What I was suggesting was instead of putting, following it up, getting rid of line 37 basically, because the waiver is for, the current standard is less than 25,000, you do not need a waiver, or you do not need to file. And what we're changing it to is less than 100,000. And what it appears to be is that we're creating with the current wording, it appears that we're creating a window that if we're creating a window of waiver between 25 and 100,000. So if you're spending less than 25,000, you require a waiver. But the wording makes the appearance, and we're just trying to clean up the wording. It creates less than 100 and more than 25. And that's what the wording creates right now in our resolution. Understand, but it's just a clearing up of the wording. We know that by state statute it's not required, but in the wording of the resolution it appears that it is we are making that requirement. So if you just get rid of instead of 25,000 or more, just put less than 100,000, you delete that window that appears to be created.
Well, we're asking for a waiver of less than 100,000, so I think that correction would work, or ending the sentence after 25,000, but I wouldn't have an issue with changing it so at the end of the sentence reads that are less than 100,000, period.
So I guess, okay, so then I would make a motion for the amendments of adding other than requirements among other things in line 11, and to end line 36 at the word, or at the figure of 100,000.
There's a motion on the floor.
Okay, second?
Supervisor Babbitt made a second. To enter in line 11, among the other, into there between among and things, and then to stop at line 36 at 100,000 and drop the rest of that off. Is that correct? Okay. Is that satisfactory?
Yep.
Okay. So does everybody understand that amendment to the resolution? So if everybody understands the amendment, we're voting on the amendment to the resolution. I have a motion and a second on the floor, so as long as there's no questions, we'll vote on that. There it is. Okay, there's one no, and the rest are yes, so we're okay on that. Now we go back to the original resolution. Are there any questions on the original resolution? Supervisor Babbitt?
I was just curious, if we pass the resolution, does this mean we're rewriting contracts for all of the folks we're working with?
I don't.
No, Tabitha says no.
I hope not. I don't think so.
That's why I asked the question,
Yeah.
because I was imagining we
could
change
see the
this,
no.
then we're going back and rewording an awful lot of contracts potentially, but if no, thank you for that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If no other questions, we're ready to vote. We have a motion and a second. Yeah. We're ready to vote. That passed unanimous with 2 vote. We have one more resolution today, and that's a resolution approving county administrator's goals and change annual evaluation date. And that came from administration committee, and I have a motion to Supervisor Schottner, seconded by Supervisor Nelson. Would you like to elaborate on that?
As the goals that are currently in the resolution were established by the meetings that we had throughout the summer in conjunction with department heads. And they were the top picks from those meetings, from those committee of whole meetings. The change of dates make it so that or any administrator would be reviewed on a regular schedule by the current board for the 2-year cycle. As it sits right now, he is reviewed for a full year's work by the sitting members, and then during an election cycle, he might have to have a review done for a full year's work by people who have only worked with him for 3 to 6 months. So it's just trying to address that issue.
Supervisor Schoberg.
I'm afraid this resolution needs some cleanup too, so please let me offer it. So at line 14 of the resolution, I propose this motion that after the date February 28th, 2015, that we place a period, and then the language regarding an every 12-month period after that should not apply to the same 3 SMART goals. So instead, at line 20, at the end, right after our hereby approved, add the following, which would be for the period July 1st, 2014 through February 28th, 2015, period. So take out the period after approved. That's the end, after February 28th, 2015, don't put a period, add this, and that the annual evaluation date for the county administrator shall be the last day of February for every 12-month period after that, period.
Wow. Do you have all that down, Cindy? Yes, I do. And that's the amendment to this resolution.
Is there
I'll
a
second
correction
that.
on line
Second to
14?
that?
Line 14, yeah, we delete
And
the
every
words "and every 12-month period after that."
Got it.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, seconded by Kiesler. You want to read that amendment back, Cindy?
We have a motion by Schoberg, second by Kiesler, to amend the resolution to delete on line 14 after February 28, 2015, add a period and strike the rest of the language. And then on line 20, after hereby approved, to remove the period and add for the period July 1, 2014 through February 28, 2015, and that the annual evaluation date for the county administrator shall be the last day of February for every 12-month period after that.
Okay.
Question, however,
Question?
the goals are going to be different every year. So that isn't cleared up. I mean, that's, the way it reads, even with the amendment, still leaves those 3 goals.
We'll have to
But-
set new goals.
But we need to indicate that those 3 goals are not,
That's
Every year.
indicated by removing the "and every 12-month period after that" from line 14.
so you took out listed above in number 20?
The goals only apply to the period July 1st, 2014 through February 28th, 2015. The county administrator doesn't have goals beyond March or February 28th of 2015.
Supervisor Octoff.
My opinion, I don't think we should put the goals in this resolution. We have it under, I think it's 9 and 10, talk about a list of SMART goals, and that's how the administrator will be evaluated. And that means that we know that they will be changed, but to list them specifically for 1 year, I don't think it's necessary. In my opinion, it shouldn't be in a resolution.
Supervisor Nelson.
If we put these 3 in here, we would have to do a new resolution every year, correct? If you do not have these in here and go with what Supervisor Ochterhoff was saying, then the administration committee every year would have 3 new goals for the administrator.
Yeah.
Am I off base here? It could be 5 or 10 goals, or 15.
Yeah. Supervisor Schottner?
The catch there is that as the current bylaws sit and as the contract sit, the current contract is, it is required that the full county board approves his goals. So that, yes, we're going to have a resolution every year approving his goals, but that's part of the contract and the bylaws as they are.
Okay.
So what Supervisor Solberg says is correct, but by rule, we have to have this. So every year, we're going to have a new resolution. So
Yes.
it's
Right.
correct both ways.
Yes, this resolution does 2 things at the same time. It sets the goals, which is required, but it's also changing the contract time frame. So by changing the wording as was put forward by Supervisor Schoberg, it makes it so his next review cycle will be in 3 months instead of in June. So that, and then every year after that is when he will be reviewed at the same time.
Okay. Supervisor
Just one other, then hopefully the Rules and Bylaw Committee will look at this situation and hopefully take care of it.
Okay. Everybody understand this is an amendment to the resolution? And do you want that amendment read back so everybody understands it? So Cindy, you want to read that back again one time so everybody understands the amendment?
Sure. We have a motion by Schoberg, second by Kiesler, to amend the resolution to, on line 14, after the word after February 28, 2015, add a period and strike the remainder. On line 20, after approved, strike the period and add, for the period July 1, 2014 through February 28, 2015, and that the annual evaluation date for the county administrator shall be the last day of February for every 12-month period there after that.
Okay. Does everybody understand that? They've heard it? Is there any more questions? If there's no questions, we'll vote on the amendment to the resolution. So.
Set it down. There we go.
1 no, 2 absent, and the rest are all yes. So the amendment stands. Now we have the resolution, and we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any questions on the resolution on the floor for the county administrator goals and change of evaluation date? There are no questions this time? No questions? If there are no questions, we will vote on this then. Oh, maybe I will. There was 1 no, 2 absent, and the rest are all yes, so. Thank you for that. We don't have any other business. I want Cindy to have a chance now to, if there's any correspondence, rezoning.
I have no correspondence, but I have just a couple of announcements, I guess. We'll be renewing the WCA membership, and part of that membership, county board members are entitled to a free subscription for WisPolitics and the Wheeler Report to be emailed to you. And as of now, only one of you are receiving them. I think it's Mr. Supervisor Novotny should be getting those. And so if you have any objection, I could sign you all up to it. It's a free subscription unless you don't want it. Do you want to just let me know? Would that work for everyone? You want it? Okay, well, I'll sign everybody up, but let me know if you don't want it. How does that sound? And then just a reminder on the equipment in here, the microphones. Those of you that have these, try not to pick them up by the neck because we're losing some. So if you could pick them up by the base, it's just a reminder on that. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, Pat.
And the Rules and Bylaws Subcommittee will be starting its work next Wednesday. So if anyone on the board, an email was sent out previously, has any recommendations or ideas, forward them to Kathy Spott and myself, not to other board members, just a reminder if you have any suggestions. Thanks.
Thank you. Pat, you have something?
Just a couple, for those of you that didn't get enough of the river crossing report this morning, there will be another presentation on Tuesday, December 16th at 7 o'clock at WITC in New Richmond. And also on Tuesday, December 9th, a week from today, at 4:30 at WITC in New Richmond. The Economic Development Corporation will be having their special meeting with our legislative delegation, and it's a good opportunity to meet with the entire legislative delegation. They have a brief presentation, and then it's open mic for question and answer with our state legislators. And that's Tuesday, December 9th at 4:30 at WITC in New Richmond. And then lastly, I'm back after having surgery last week. I'm going to be leaving shortly, but it's good to be back, and thank you to all the board members that sent me emails and notes of encouragement. It was much appreciated. Thank you.
Good to have you back, Pat. Go ahead, Supervisor Dawson.
Just a quick one, Chair. Last Wednesday afternoon, I went around the corner down to the vet's office. Mike, thank you, appreciate it. Last Wednesday afternoon, I was down around the corner in the old vet's office, and for those of you that want to stop down there, victim witness has moved into their new home. Pam and her staff asked me to thank Jim, you and your staff. I think you said Casey was involved with that whole works down there. They greatly appreciate your help, and I do as well. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Anything else? If not, thank you, everyone. Meeting's adjourned.